Every night, park rangers across America patrol millions of acres of wilderness alone. Some of them report strange sounds, missing persons, things they can't explain. Some of them stop filing reports altogether, and some of them never finish their shift. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, plain white envelope with the Forest Service emblem in the corner. I hadn't applied for the position in months, assumed my application had been lost in bureaucratic limbo. But there it was, an offer for a seasonal wilderness ranger position at Whispering Pines National Forest. I read the letter 3 times before the reality sank in. After years of mundane office work, I was finally going to live my dream of working in the wilderness. The position was remote, the pay modest, but the opportunity to escape the concrete jungle and immerse myself in nature was exactly what I needed. As a wilderness ranger, I would be responsible for wilderness monitoring, trail maintenance, visitor education, and emergency response, including search and rescue. The job description mentioned long periods of isolation, limited cell service, and the need for self-reliance. Perfect. My friends thought I was crazy. "You're giving up a stable job to live in the middle of nowhere?" Maya asked over coffee the day before I left. "What about bears? Mountain lions?" I laughed it off. "That's what bear spray is for. Besides, I'll have training." What I didn't tell her was that the prospect of danger was part of the appeal. Not that I had a death wish, but after years of predictability, I craved the unknown. Something primal called to me from those ancient forests. Something I couldn't explain but felt compelled to answer. The drive to Whispering Pines took nearly 8 hours. As I left the city behind, cell reception gradually disappeared, and paved roads gave way to gravel, then dirt. The forest seemed to swallow me whole, dense pines crowding the narrow road, their shadows growing longer as the sun began its descent. The ranger station was a modest log structure nestled in a small clearing. Several Forest Service vehicles were parked outside, and a weathered sign welcomed visitors. I parked my loaded-down SUV and took a deep breath. This was it, my new life. Chief Ranger Barrett was a tall woman with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands that spoke of decades in the wilderness. Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct. "So, you're the new seasonal we've been waiting for," she said, sizing me up. "Ever worked in wilderness before?" "Volunteer trail maintenance with the Pacific Crest Association," I replied. "And I've done solo backpacking trips. 2 weeks was my longest." She nodded, unimpressed. 2 weeks is a vacation. You'll be stationed at Thunder Lake Outpost for 4 months. Your nearest neighbor will be 12 miles away by trail. Radio contact only, and that's weather-dependent. My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. "I understand." "Do you?" She leaned against her desk. "What hiker hasn't dreamed of being a ranger? It's the primo job in the outdoors, right? You patrol spectacular wilderness preserves, become a backcountry hero." Her tone wasn't mocking, just matter-of-fact. Reality's different. We're understaffed, underfunded, and the wilderness doesn't care about your comfort. "I'm not here for comfort," I said. Something in my response must have satisfied her, because she nodded and handed me a folder. "Your orientation starts tomorrow at 0600. Today, meet your team and get settled in the bunkhouse. You head to your outpost in 3 days." The orientation was intense. First aid certification, wildfire protocols, search and rescue basics, wildlife encounters, forest regulations. I learned that wilderness rangers need specialized skills: emergency medical response, high-angle rescue, and even bear management. By the end of day 2, my head was swimming with information, and my muscles ached from physical training. My trainer, Ranger Kai Wong, was relentless but fair. In his 15 years with the Forest Service, he'd seen everything from lost hikers to catastrophic wildfires. "You're catching on quick," he said as we practiced using the satellite radio. "But book learning only gets you so far out there. The forest will be your real teacher." On my final night before heading to Thunder Lake, the Rangers gathered for a small send-off dinner. Most were veterans with decades of experience, their bodies leaner and harder than any gym could produce. They shared stories, some funny, some harrowing, of their time in the wilderness. "Ever seen anything strange out there?" I asked during a lull in conversation. The table grew quiet. Rangers exchanged glances. "Define strange," Kai said carefully. "I don't know. Unexplainable things, weird sounds, lights, phenomena." Chief Barrett studied me. "You believe in that sort of thing?" "I believe there's plenty we don't understand about the wilderness," I answered. An older ranger named Jim cleared his throat. "Thunder Lake has stories." "Jim," Barrett warned. "The rookie should know," Jim insisted, "especially if they're going to be alone up there." Barrett sighed. "Indigenous peoples called that area Nakohe Miskwa, Shadow Walker's territory. The name stuck with early settlers, though they anglicized it to Thunder Lake because of how sound echoes in the valley." "Shadow Walker?" I asked. "A guardian spirit in their folklore," Barrett said. "The locals still leave offerings at certain trees before entering the deeper woods." Jim leaned forward. "Hikers report strange sounds up there, like footsteps following them, but nothing's there when they turn around. Some claim to see a large figure at dusk, watching from the tree line." "Are you talking about Bigfoot?" I asked, unable to keep the skepticism from my voice. Several rangers shifted uncomfortably. Barrett shrugged. "Most rangers won't officially report strange sightings. Nobody wants to be seen as a fool by their colleagues." "But you've heard things," I pressed. "I've heard the forest at night," she replied evenly. "And sometimes it doesn't sound like any animal I can identify. That's all I'll say on the matter." The conversation moved on, but I caught Kai watching me with an unreadable expression. Later, as we washed dishes, he spoke in a low voice. "Whatever you do, don't go chasing stories up there. Thunder Lake is remote, and if you get in trouble, help is hours away, if we can reach you at all." I nodded, but a seed of curiosity had already taken root. Shadow Walker. The name resonated with me for reasons I couldn't explain. The next morning, I loaded my gear into a Forest Service truck, and Kai drove me to the trailhead for Thunder Lake. The hike would take most of the day, 6 miles of steadily climbing trail to reach the outpost. "Radio check-in every evening at 1900 hours, Kai reminded me. "Missed 2 in a row and we send someone to check on you." "Got it." He handed me a map with patrol routes marked in red. "Stick to these for your first 2 weeks. Get to know the territory before you start exploring." I shouldered my heavy pack, adjusted the straps, and took a deep breath of pine-scented air. "One last thing," Kai said, his expression serious. "There's an area about 2 miles north of the outpost that locals call the Whisper Grove. It's not on any official maps, but you'll know it by the ring of ancient cedars. The indigenous people consider it sacred ground. And nothing, just respect it. Don't camp there, don't cut anything, leave no trace." With that cryptic advice, he wished me luck and drove away, leaving me alone at the trailhead. The forest loomed before me, vast and primeval, calling me forward into its depths. I took my first step on the trail, unaware that I was crossing more than just a physical threshold. Ahead lay Thunder Lake and the territory of the Shadow Walker, a journey that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the wilderness, about reality, and about my own deepest fears. Chapter 2, Thunder Lake. The climb to Thunder Lake was more grueling than I'd anticipated. The trail switchbacked steeply through old-growth forest, my heavy pack digging into my shoulders with each step. By mid-afternoon, sweat soaked my shirt despite the cool mountain air, and my legs burned from the constant ascent. But the discomfort was worth it. The forest here was unlike anything I'd experienced, primeval and vast. Towering cedars and Douglas firs, some centuries old, formed a dense canopy overhead. Shafts of sunlight pierced through in golden columns, illuminating ferns and moss-covered rocks below. The constant presence of these ancient trees was humbling, a reminder of how brief and small human lives are in comparison. I stopped at a viewpoint to catch my breath. Behind me, the valley stretched out in endless waves of green, while ahead, the terrain grew more rugged. According to my map, I was about halfway to Thunder Lake Outpost. I checked my watch. Still 4 hours of daylight left, enough time to reach my destination if I maintained a steady pace. As I hiked deeper into the wilderness, the trail grew less defined, requiring careful navigation. The forest changed subtly, too. The undergrowth thinned and the spaces between trees widened, though the trees themselves grew even larger. The silence was profound, punctuated only by the occasional bird call or the distant sound of running water. I crossed a narrow wooden footbridge, spanning a ravine where a creek rushed below, white water tumbling over moss-covered boulders. The bridge creaked ominously under my weight but held firm. On the other side, the trail curved sharply upward again, and I gritted my teeth for another climb. That's when I noticed the first strange thing, a series of smooth river stones stacked into a small tower, about knee-high, just off the trail. The balanced rocks formed what hikers call a cairn, typically used as trail markers. But this one seemed deliberately placed away from the path, as if marking something else entirely. A chill ran up my spine, despite the exertion warming my body. I continued onward, disturbed without knowing why. 20 minutes later, I spotted another cairn, this one larger and topped with a piece of weathered antler. Then another, formed in a spiral pattern. The cairns appeared at irregular intervals over the next mile, each one more elaborate than the last. None were on the official map, and they didn't appear to mark any particular terrain feature or trail junction. As the afternoon waned, the forest grew darker beneath the canopy. I switched on my headlamp, though it wasn't yet dusk, more for comfort than necessity. According to my GPS, I was less than a mile from the outpost when the trail opened into a small meadow dotted with wildflowers. In the center stood a massive stump, easily 15 feet in diameter, a remnant of an ancient giant that had once dominated this clearing. I approached it, drawn by its immensity. The top surface was worn smooth, as if from years of use, and arranged in the center were pine cones, feathers, small polished stones, and what looked like strips of colored cloth, offerings of some kind. I recalled Barrett's words about local indigenous people leaving offerings in certain places, and suddenly the cairns made more sense. This wasn't just wilderness, it was someone's sacred space. Respecting the site, I skirted around it and continued on my way. The trail narrowed again, winding through dense underbrush before finally emerging at my destination as the last daylight faded from the sky. Thunder Lake Outpost wasn't much to look at. A sturdy one-room cabin with a small covered porch, nestled in a stand of pines about 100 yards from the lakeshore. A tool shed stood nearby, and a fire ring with log benches occupied the area between the cabin and lake. It was simple but functional, and it was home for the next 4 months. I unlocked the door with the key Barrett had given me and stepped inside, finding the interior clean but Spartan. A wood stove dominated one wall, with a small kitchen area beside it. A single bed stood in the corner, beneath a window overlooking the lake. A desk, with a radio setup, first aid supplies, and various Forest Service manuals completed the furnishings. Solar panels on the roof provided limited electricity for the radio and a few LED lights. I unpacked quickly, stowing food in the bear-proof containers and arranging my gear while there was still enough light to see by. Then I stepped outside to complete my first official duty, radio check-in. "Thunder Lake to base, radio check over," I said, following protocol. The radio crackled with static before Chief Barrett's voice came through. "Base to Thunder Lake, we read you. Status report? Arrived safely at outpost. All facilities functional. No visitor contacts or incidents to report." "Copy that. Weather forecast shows clear skies for the next 3 days. Good night for stargazing. Check in tomorrow at 1900 hours. Base out." I replaced the radio handset and walked down to the lakeshore. Thunder Lake lived up to its name, a vast mirror of water surrounded by rising peaks, perfectly still in the evening calm. As darkness fell completely, stars emerged in dazzling profusion, more than I'd ever seen in the light-polluted city skies. Their reflection in the lake created the illusion of standing in space, suspended between two star fields. The beauty was overwhelming, but so was the silence. No distant traffic noise, no human voices, not even the hum of electrical appliances that forms the background soundtrack of modern life. Just profound, absolute silence, until it wasn't. The sound was so faint I almost missed it, a rhythmic thudding from somewhere across the lake, too regular for falling branches, too heavy for deer. It sounded almost like footsteps, but amplified, as if whatever made them weighed hundreds of pounds. I strained to see across the water, but darkness had swallowed the opposite shore. The sound continued for perhaps a minute, then stopped as abruptly as it had begun. Probably a moose or elk, I told myself. The valley would naturally amplify sounds, creating the illusion of something larger. Still, I found myself retreating to the cabin, securing the door behind me, though I'd been looking forward to sleeping under the stars. Inside, I lit the wood stove against the mountain chill and boiled water for a simple dinner of dehydrated stew. As I ate, I reviewed the patrol schedule for the coming week and studied the topographic maps of my assigned area. The strange cairns weren't marked, nor was the stump with offerings. I made notes on my own map, adding these features. My thoughts returned to the Whisper Grove Kai had mentioned, a ring of ancient cedars about 2 miles north. It wasn't on any official maps either, but apparently significant enough for him to warn me about it. I marked its approximate location with a question mark, making a mental note to approach it with appropriate respect when I found it. Exhaustion from the day's hike soon overtook me. I banked the fire in the stove, checked that all food was properly stored, and collapsed onto the narrow bed. Despite the unfamiliar surroundings and the lingering unease from the strange sounds, I fell immediately into deep sleep. The dream came swiftly. I was running through the forest at night, moving with impossible speed between trees I could somehow see clearly despite the darkness. The sensation wasn't frightening but exhilarating, as if I belonged here, as if the forest was an extension of my own body. I could feel every root underfoot, sense every branch overhead without looking. The dream logic told me I was hunting, though what prey I couldn't say. I came to the edge of a clearing bathed in moonlight. In the center stood a massive figure, at least 8 feet tall, broad-shouldered and covered in dark fur. It wasn't looking at me, but gazing up at the moon. Without turning, it spoke, its voice like stones grinding together. "You are in my territory now, Watcher. Do you come with respect or trespass?" I tried to answer, but had no voice. The figure slowly turned, and I caught a glimpse of deep-set eyes beneath a heavy brow, glinting with intelligence that seemed ancient and alien. "I will be watching you," it rumbled, "as you watch my forest." I woke with a gasp, sitting bolt upright in bed. Pale morning light filtered through the cabin windows. Outside, birds sang their dawn chorus, and the surface of the lake rippled gently in the morning breeze. Perfectly normal, perfectly peaceful. Just a dream, I thought, rubbing my face. Just my subconscious processing Jim's stories of Shadow Walker. But when I rose and went to wash my face in the basin, I froze at what I saw in the small mirror above it. Across my cheek were 3 parallel scratches, thin but unmistakable, as if something with claws had lightly grazed my skin while I slept. Scratches I was certain hadn't been there the night before. Chapter 3, The First Encounter. The scratches on my face faded by midday, but the uneasiness they provoked lingered. I told myself I must have scratched myself in my sleep, perhaps reacting to the vivid dream, the rational explanation, the safe explanation. I spent that first full day at Thunder Lake exploring the immediate vicinity of the outpost, familiarizing myself with the terrain and checking the condition of nearby trails. The work was physical but straightforward, clearing fallen branches, noting areas where erosion needed addressing, documenting any signs of improper camping or litter. As a ranger, I was responsible for ensuring bridges were passable, reporting on river crossings, checking backcountry campsites to ensure fires were properly extinguished. Basic stewardship. But I was also there as a presence, someone hikers could approach for information or assistance, someone to respond if things went wrong. I encountered no visitors that first day, unsurprising given the remoteness. According to the logbook at the outpost, Thunder Lake saw perhaps a dozen hikers a week during peak season. Most of them experienced backcountry travelers staying just one night before moving on. That evening, after my radio check-in, I sat on the porch watching twilight settle over the lake. In the fading light, I noticed movement at the tree line on the far shore, something large, moving with deliberate slowness along the edge of the forest. I grabbed my binoculars for a better look, but by then, whatever it was had vanished into the deepening shadows. Just wildlife, I told myself. This was their home long before it was a national forest. The next morning, I woke before dawn and prepared for my first official patrol, a 6-mile loop that would take me northwest from the outpost, along a ridge overlooking the valley, then back via a different trail. I packed light but thoroughly. Water, emergency supplies, first aid kit, radio, maps, and ranger identification. The early start would allow me to complete the route and return before dark. The forest felt different now that I was on duty. I found myself noticing details I'd missed on the hike in, subtle game trails branching off the main path, distinctive bird calls, the varied textures of bark on different tree species. I recorded observations in my notebook, locations of downed trees that needed clearing, signs of wildlife activity, evidence of recent campsites. By mid-morning, I'd reached the ridge. The view was spectacular. Miles of unbroken wilderness stretched in every direction, mountain peaks rising in the distance, still capped with snow despite the summer warmth. I paused to eat an energy bar and drink some water, scanning the landscape with a ranger's eye for smoke or any other concerning signs. That's when I noticed it, about 2 miles north, a perfect circle of trees that stood out from the surrounding forest. The trees were massive, their canopies forming a distinct ring around what appeared to be a clearing. The Whisper Grove, it had to be. The feature was subtle enough that a casual observer might miss it, but from this vantage point, its deliberate symmetry was unmistakable. Checking my map, I confirmed it wasn't on my planned patrol route, but it wasn't far off, and I had time. Curiosity won out. I adjusted my course, following the ridge toward a descent that would lead me to the grove. The trail down from the ridge was steep and seldom used, requiring careful footing. As I descended, the forest grew noticeably older, more moss, larger trees, fewer signs of human passage. The light changed, too, filtered through the dense canopy into a greenish gloom despite the bright day. I was about a half-mile from where I estimated the grove to be when I found the first sign something was wrong, a set of tracks crossing the trail. They resembled bear prints in their 5-toed pattern, but were much too large, easily twice the size of the biggest black bear I'd ever documented. And the stride length was immense, suggesting a creature of impossible proportions. I knelt to examine them more closely, placing my hand beside one for scale. The impression was deep, indicating substantial weight, and remarkably clear in the soft soil. Whatever made these had passed through very recently. A prickling sensation spread across the back of my neck, the feeling of being watched. Slowly, I stood and turned in a complete circle, scanning the surrounding forest. Nothing moved, no birds called. The silence was absolute and smothering. "Hello?" I called, immediately regretting breaking the silence. My voice sounded thin and alien in the dense forest. No response, but the feeling of observation intensified. I unclipped my radio, considering calling in what I'd found, but hesitated. What would I say? That I'd found unexplainably large footprints and got spooked? That wouldn't help my credibility with the other rangers. I needed more information before making a report. I took photos of the tracks with my digital camera, placing my ranger badge beside them for scale, and recorded measurements and observations in my notebook. Then, against my better judgment, I decided to follow them. The tracks led deeper into the forest, away from any established trail. I marked my path carefully with my GPS unit, not wanting to become disoriented in the increasingly unfamiliar terrain. The vegetation grew denser, forcing me to push through underbrush at times. The footprints remained consistent, large, bipedal, and purposeful in their direction. After about 20 minutes of tracking, the forest opened suddenly into a clearing. I stopped at the edge, immediately recognizing where I was, the Whisper Grove. But no map or description could have prepared me for the reality of it. 13 enormous cedars formed a perfect circle around a clearing about 50 yards in diameter. These weren't just old trees, they were ancients, with trunks wider than my outstretched arms could encompass and heights that strained my neck to follow. Most remarkable was the fact that they were uniform in size and evenly spaced, too perfect to be natural, yet they had clearly stood for centuries, perhaps millennia. The clearing itself was covered in lush grass, but entirely free of saplings or underbrush, as if nothing else was permitted to grow there. At the center stood a flat, table-like stone about waist-high, large enough for a person to lie upon. The stone bore weathered carvings, spirals and symbols I couldn't decipher. Around its base, fresh offerings had been placed, bundles of herbs, feathers, small carved figurines, and what looked like strips of cloth tied to sticks planted in the ground. The footprints I'd been following led directly to this stone, then disappeared as if whatever made them had simply vanished. The silence in the grove was different from the surrounding forest, not oppressive, but expectant, as if the place itself was waiting for something. I approached the stone carefully, respecting the obvious spiritual significance of the site. The surface was worn smooth, with shallow depressions that suggested centuries of use. As I reached out to touch one of the carvings, a voice spoke directly behind me. "This is not for you to touch." I spun around, heart hammering. A man stood at the edge of the clearing, tall, middle-aged, with copper skin and long black hair streaked with gray. He wore modern hiking clothes, but carried a traditional wooden staff. His expression was neutral, neither threatening nor welcoming. "I'm sorry," I said, stepping back from the stone. "I'm the new ranger at Thunder Lake. I didn't mean any disrespect." He studied me for a long moment. "Nakohe Miskwa has been watching you since you arrived," the name from Barrett's story, Shadow Walker. "What do you mean?" I asked. Instead of answering, he gestured around the grove. "This place predates your national forest by many thousands of years. It was sacred when the oldest of these trees was a sapling." "Are you from the local tribe?" I asked. He ignored my question. "Why did you come to this forest?" "It's my job," I began, then stopped, sensing he was asking something deeper. "I wanted connection, with something older and more real than the world I left behind." This seemed to satisfy him. He nodded slowly. "You sought, and so you were brought here. But seeking comes with responsibility. Knowledge has a price." "What knowledge?" "You followed the tracks," he said simply. "They led you here because you were meant to see." A chill ran through me despite the warm day. "See what? What made those tracks?" The man stepped forward into the clearing. "The guardian of these woods has walked here since before human memory. Some call it Sasquatch, some call it monster. My people call it Nakohe Miskwa, Shadow Walker, for its ability to move between the worlds of spirit and flesh." I wanted to dismiss this as superstition, but the tracks I'd followed were real. The scratches on my face had been real. "Why would it reveal itself to me?" I asked. "It reveals itself to those who will listen," he replied. "Those who might understand." He gestured to the stone. "This is a threshold place. The guardian uses it to cross between worlds when the veil grows thin." "You've seen it?" I pressed. His expression grew somber. "I have encountered the guardian many times, sometimes as protector, sometimes as judge. It defends the balance of this place against those who would harm it." "Are you saying it's dangerous?" "All powers of nature are dangerous when disrespected." He fixed me with an intense gaze. 3 hikers have gone missing in these woods in the past year. Your people found no trace." This was news to me. That wasn't in any of my briefings. "Because your people do not understand what happened. The missing were not good people. They came to take, not to respect. The guardian judges those with darkness in their hearts." I felt a flicker of irritation at the cryptic conversation. "If you have information about missing hikers, you should report it." He smiled faintly. "I am reporting it, to you. You are the watcher now." The word from my dream, a coincidence, surely. "What am I supposed to do with this information?" "Watch, listen, learn the true language of the forest." He turned to leave. "And when the time comes, choose wisely." "Wait," I called. "I don't even know your name." He paused at the edge of the grove. "Some call me Joseph. I am the last keeper of this place." Then he stepped into the trees and was gone before I could follow. I remained in the grove for some time afterward, processing the strange encounter. Part of me wanted to dismiss it all. The tracks, Joseph's warnings, the eerie perfection of the grove, as elaborate storytelling meant to impress or frighten the new ranger. But another part recognized something genuine in the man's concern, and those tracks had been real, not fabricated. I'd taken photos, measurements. Whatever made them was no ordinary forest creature. The sun had begun its westward descent, reminding me that I needed to complete my patrol and return to the outpost before dark. With a last look at the stone altar, I started back toward the main trail, navigating with my GPS. The feeling of being watched stayed with me all the way back to Thunder Lake. Twice I stopped, certain I'd heard heavy footsteps paralleling my path through the underbrush. Twice I called out. Twice I was met with silence. That night after radio check-in, I reviewed the photos I'd taken of the tracks. They were clear, unmistakable, a bipedal creature with 5-toed feet nearly 18 inches long. In the classification system used by researchers of unknown bipedal primates, these would qualify as Class 1-inch evidence, clear tracks from a reliable observer. I knew I should report them, but remembered Barrett's warning about credibility. Besides, I had no context for what I'd found. Missing hikers? A forest guardian? Joseph's warnings seemed far-fetched, yet he clearly knew the area intimately. I decided to hold off on reporting my findings until I gathered more information. Instead, I wrote detailed notes in my personal journal, including everything Joseph had told me about the guardian and the missing hikers. As I prepared for bed, I found myself securing the cabin door more thoroughly than necessary, checking the windows twice. The rational part of my mind mocked this caution. What door or window could stop a creature that could allegedly move between worlds? I lay awake for hours, listening to the night sounds of the forest. Just as I was finally drifting off, a sound jolted me back to alertness. 3 distinct knocks on the cabin wall, powerful enough to vibrate the entire structure. Then silence. I sat frozen in bed, straining to hear any movement outside. Nothing. After several minutes, I worked up the courage to approach the window and peer out into the darkness. The moonlit clearing around the cabin was empty, but at the edge of the trees, just visible in the silver light, stood a figure. Tall, broad, still, watching. For 3 days after my encounter at the Whisper Grove, I kept to routine patrols and maintenance work, deliberately avoiding the northern section of my territory. The incident with the knocking on my cabin hadn't repeated, but each night I sensed a presence circling the outpost, never seen directly, but betrayed by subtle sounds and the prickling awareness of being observed. During my evening radio check-ins, I considered mentioning these disturbances, but always stopped short. What would I say? That I was spooked by campfire stories and shadows? The other rangers had real concerns to address: trail conditions, visitor safety, potential fire hazards. My unverified experiences seemed trivial by comparison. On the 4th day, while clearing a deadfall across the main trail south of Thunder Lake, I encountered my first visitors, a couple from Australia on a 3-week backpacking trip through the wilderness areas of the Pacific Northwest. Mick and Lena Donovan were experienced hikers in their late 30s, their weathered faces and lean physiques speaking to countless miles on the trail. "Beautiful country you've got here, Ranger," Mick said as I helped them navigate around the tree I was clearing. His accent was thick but warm. "Reminds me a bit of Tasmania, only bigger, much bigger." I smiled, grateful for human contact after days of solitude. "Where are you headed?" "Planning to camp at Thunder Lake tonight," Lena replied, adjusting her pack straps. "Then push north tomorrow toward Crown Ridge." North, through the area where I'd found the tracks, near the Whisper Grove. "The north trail gets pretty rough," I said carefully. "Not well maintained. Might be better to head east toward Alpine Meadows." Mick grinned. "We don't mind rough. Been planning this route for months. Want to see the old-growth forest up that way?" I couldn't dissuade them without a legitimate reason, and I'm afraid of what might be in those woods wasn't exactly Forest Service policy. Instead, I provided standard safety information, checked that their wilderness permit was in order, and reminded them about proper food storage to avoid attracting bears. "You're welcome to camp near the outpost tonight," I offered. "The lake's beautiful at sunset." They accepted gratefully, and I finished clearing the trail before leading them back to Thunder Lake. Having visitors lifted my spirits, and for the first time since arriving, I felt like a proper ranger, providing information, ensuring safety, sharing my knowledge of the area. That evening, we sat around the fire ring near the shore, sharing trail stories as stars emerged overhead. The Donovans had hiked 6 continents and had a seemingly endless supply of adventures to recount. I found myself laughing for the first time in days. "So what brought you to ranger work?" Lena asked as we watched the flames dance. "Most people are busy climbing corporate ladders, not mountains." The question made me reflect. What had drawn me here? Not just the job, but this specific wilderness. "I needed something real," I finally said. "In the city, everything felt artificial, constructed. I wanted to connect with something ancient, something that exists on its own terms." Mick nodded. "We get that. It's why we spend every vacation in places like this instead of resorts." "Have you encountered anything unusual in the forest?" I found myself asking. Strange sounds, unexplained phenomena. They exchanged a look. "Like what?" Lena asked. I hesitated, then plunged ahead. "I've heard stories about this area. The local indigenous people call it Shadow Walker's territory. There are legends about a forest guardian." "Ah, you mean Sasquatch," Mick said, grinning. "Every wilderness has its monster stories. In Australia, we've got the Yowie, our version of Bigfoot. Never seen one myself, though there's places in the outback where the Aboriginal people won't go at night." "It's more than just stories," I said, surprising myself with my conviction. "There's evidence?" Lena leaned forward, intrigued. "What kind of evidence?" I told them about the tracks I'd found, my encounter with Joseph, and the strange knocking on my cabin. As I spoke, the forest around us seemed to grow quieter, as if listening. "Could have been a bear," Mick suggested when I finished. "Some can stand on their hind legs, make tracks that look almost human." "Not like these," I insisted. "And bears don't knock on cabins in patterns of 3. Lena looked thoughtful. "Many cultures have stories of forest guardians or wild men. The Russians have the Leshy. Europeans have woodwoses. Japan has the mountain tang, all with similar descriptions: tall, powerful, wild, but intelligent." "You believe those stories?" I asked. She shrugged. "I believe there are things science hasn't cataloged yet. The world's still got secrets." The conversation drifted to other topics, but as the fire burned down to embers, Mick returned to my warning about the Northern Trail. "Is there something specific we should look out for tomorrow?" he asked. "Any real hazards, not just legends?" I considered my answer carefully. "Just be respectful. If you come across anything unusual, rock formations, old trees in circles, cairns, treat them as you would sacred sites. And if you feel watched, you probably are. Wildlife is always more aware of us than we are of them." They nodded, taking my advice as practical wilderness guidance rather than the warning it was meant to be. We said goodnight, and they retired to their tent pitched near the shore while I returned to my cabin. I slept fitfully, waking several times to listen for sounds outside. Nothing disturbed the night, not even the usual forest creatures. The silence itself seemed watchful. In the morning, I saw the Donovans off after breakfast, providing them with a map marked with water sources and suitable campsites along their planned route. I'd drawn a rough circle around the approximate location of the Whisper Grove with a note to pass respectfully. "Thanks for the hospitality," Mick said as they shouldered their packs. "Maybe we'll stop by on our way back in 3 days." "Safe travels," I replied. "Remember to hang your food properly. There's been increased bear activity." A small lie, but one that might make them more cautious. I watched them disappear up the North Trail with an inexplicable sense of foreboding. Part of me wanted to follow, to ensure they stayed safe, but I had scheduled maintenance on the East Trail that couldn't wait. The day passed uneventfully. I cleared drainage ditches, repaired a small footbridge, and documented some illegal campfire remains left by careless hikers. By late afternoon, I'd completed my assigned tasks and returned to the outpost for my daily radio check-in. "Thunder Lake to base, come in," I called. Static, then Barrett's voice. "Base to Thunder Lake, go ahead." I provided my standard report, then added, "Had 2 visitors passing through. Australian couple heading north toward Crown Ridge. Expected to return this way in 3 days?" "Copy that," Barrett replied. "Any concerns?" I hesitated. "Not specifically. Just thought you should know who's in the area." "Understood. We've got a weather system moving in tomorrow night. Nothing severe expected, but prepare for rain. Base out." I replaced the handset and stepped onto the porch, gazing north where the Donovans had gone. The forest looked peaceful in the golden late afternoon light, betraying nothing of what might lurk within its depths. That night, the silence around the outpost was complete. No insects chirping, no owls calling, none of the usual nocturnal sounds of the forest. I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, straining to hear anything beyond the gentle lapping of water at the lake shore. Around midnight, as I was about to turn in, a sound carried across the lake, a distant, high-pitched scream that could have been human or animal. It came once, held for several seconds, then faded. I stood, heart racing, trying to determine its direction and distance. North, perhaps 2 or 3 miles away, near where the Donovans would be camping. I grabbed my emergency pack, headlamp, and radio. Regulations were clear. Investigate any potential distress signals immediately. But venturing into the forest at night, alone, went against basic safety protocols. Thunder Lake to base, emergency channel, I called into the radio. Only static answered. The mountains often blocked transmissions at night, creating dead zones. I'd have to make the decision alone. The scream didn't repeat, but my unease grew. I strapped on my pack, checked my first aid supplies and emergency beacon, and set out on the north trail by headlamp. The forest at night was transformed. Familiar landmarks became alien and threatening in the artificial light. I moved as quickly as safety allowed, occasionally calling out, "Forest Service, anyone need help?" Only echoes answered. An hour into my search, I reached a fork in the trail. The main path continued northwest toward Crown Ridge, while a smaller trail branched directly north. According to my map, the Donovan should have followed the main trail, but something pulled me toward the northern branch, an intuition I couldn't explain. The side trail grew increasingly overgrown, suggesting it was rarely used. My headlamp caught glimpses of eyes reflecting in the underbrush, small animals watching my passage. The feeling of being observed intensified, but not by anything small. The trail ended abruptly at a small clearing. My light revealed a disturbing scene, a campsite in disarray. A 2-person tent lay collapsed and torn, its contents scattered. A cooking pot still hung over a cold fire ring. 2 backpacks had been emptied, their contents strewn across the ground. Fear knotted in my stomach. This had to be the Donovans' camp, though they shouldn't have been here. This wasn't on their planned route. "Mick! Lena!" I called, sweeping my light in a circle around the clearing. No response. I checked the scattered gear for blood or signs of violence, but found none. No indication of animal attack either. No claw marks, no signs of feeding. The damage seemed purposeful rather than predatory, as if someone or something had deliberately searched the campsite. Looking closer, I found large footprints in the soft earth around the perimeter, the same massive 5-toed prints I'd documented near the Whisper Grove. They circled the clearing, but never entered it. I used my radio again. "Thunder Lake to base, emergency. Possible missing hikers." Still nothing but static. I had 2 options. Continue searching through the night, possibly getting lost myself, or mark the location and return at first light with better equipment and the possibility of radio contact for backup. Training won out over instinct. I secured the site as best I could, marking the GPS coordinates and photographing the scene for evidence. I collected some of the Donovans' personal effects, their ID cards, satellite phone, damaged beyond use, and a camera, and placed them in my pack. Then I blazed a clear trail back to the main path with reflective tape before reluctantly heading back to the outpost. The return journey felt watched every step of the way. Twice I spun around, certain something large was following just out of sight. Twice, I found nothing but shadows. Back at Thunder Lake, I tried the radio repeatedly without success. The emergency protocol was clear. At first light, I would return to the campsite and begin a proper search. If the Donovans weren't found quickly, I'd trigger my emergency beacon to summon a full search and rescue response. Sleep was impossible. I reviewed the photos I'd taken, studying the footprints and the pattern of destruction. Nothing made sense. Why would the Donovans leave the main trail? What could have destroyed their camp without leaving traces of an animal attack? And why were there no defensive marks, no signs of struggle? As dawn approached, I prepared for the search. Extra water, food, comprehensive first aid kit, emergency flares, and spare batteries for all equipment. Just as I was about to depart, the radio crackled to life. Base to Thunder Lake. Emergency check-in. Do you copy? I grabbed the handset. Thunder Lake here. We have a situation. Australian hikers missing, campsite found destroyed about 3 miles north of the outpost. No blood or signs of animal attack, but definite signs of disturbance. Requesting immediate search and rescue support. A pause, then Barrett's voice, tense. Copy that. Can you describe the scene in detail? I relayed everything I'd found, including the footprints, though I described them carefully as unusual tracks, possibly multiple animals. Stay at the outpost, Barrett ordered. Search team is being dispatched from Western Station, ETA 3 hours. They'll meet you at Thunder Lake and proceed to the site together. Do not attempt solo search. Repeat, do not search alone. But they could be injured, lost, I protested. That's an order, Barrett cut in. Weather system is moving in faster than predicted. Visibility will be poor. Wait for the team. I acknowledged reluctantly and signed off, stepping outside to check the sky. Dark clouds were indeed gathering on the western horizon, advancing quickly. A storm was coming, but so was something else. At the edge of the clearing, partially obscured by undergrowth, stood a figure. Tall, impossibly tall, and broad-shouldered, covered in dark fur. It wasn't attempting to hide, standing motionless, watching me with eyes that reflected red in the early light. My body froze, but my mind raced. This was no bear, no known predator. This was what the local people called shadow walker, what science might label Sasquatch, what my instincts recognized as ancient and dangerous. We regarded each other across 50 yards of open ground. I made no move toward my camera, my radio, or any weapon. Somehow, I knew that would break whatever tenuous moment we were sharing. Slowly, deliberately, the figure raised one massive hand and beckoned to me. A clear, unmistakable gesture. Follow. Then it turned and moved into the forest with surprising grace for its size, pausing once to look back, ensuring I understood its intent. Barrett's orders echoed in my mind. Stay put, wait for the team, don't search alone. But the Donovans might be running out of time. And something told me this creature, this being, knew where they were. I made my decision. Leaving a note detailing my intentions and the direction I was heading, I grabbed my pack and plunged into the forest after the retreating figure, following it into the gathering storm and whatever lay beyond. The path led not north toward the destroyed campsite, but east, following a game trail I hadn't known existed. The massive figure stayed just ahead, visible enough to follow but never close enough to study clearly. It moved with surprising stealth despite its size, occasionally pausing to ensure I was still following. The storm approached rapidly, darkening the forest to twilight beneath heavy clouds. Wind whipped through the canopy, creating a chaotic symphony of creaking branches and rustling leaves. The air grew heavy with the scent of approaching rain. I kept pace as best I could, pushing through underbrush and scrambling over fallen logs. Any fear I felt was overridden by determination to find the missing hikers and the strange certainty that this creature was leading me to them. After perhaps an hour, we reached a steep ravine where a waterfall cascaded down moss-covered rocks. The figure stopped at the edge, turned to ensure I was watching, then disappeared behind the curtain of water. I approached cautiously. Behind the waterfall, partially concealed by the flowing water, was the entrance to a cave. I hesitated at the threshold, every instinct warning against entering such a confined space with an unknown entity. But concern for the Donovans pushed me forward. Switching on my headlamp, I ducked through the watery entrance into a surprisingly large cavern. My light revealed smooth stone walls rising to a ceiling about 15 feet high. The air was cool and damp, with a mineral smell that suggested the cave system extended deep into the mountain. The creature was nowhere to be seen, but a faint glow emanated from a tunnel at the far end of the chamber. I moved toward it, alert for any sound or movement. The tunnel curved gently downward, running perhaps 100 yards before opening into an even larger cavern. Here, the source of light became apparent. Crude torches made of resinous wood burned in sconces along the walls, casting flickering shadows across the space. In the center of the cavern, lying on beds of moss and ferns, were Mick and Lena Donovan. They appeared unharmed but unconscious, their breathing steady, faces peaceful as if in deep sleep. I rushed to them, checking vital signs. Strong pulses, no visible injuries. I called their names, shook them gently, but got no response. They seemed to be in some sort of trance or induced sleep. "What did you do to them?" I demanded into the seemingly empty cavern. Movement from the shadows answered me. The creature emerged into the torchlight, and for the first time, I could see it clearly. It stood over 8 feet tall, with a massive, barrel-shaped torso covered in dark brown fur that silvered slightly at the shoulders and head. Its face was both alien and startlingly familiar, a heavy brow ridge over deep-set eyes that held unmistakable intelligence, a broad, flat nose, and a mouth that seemed capable of speech, though not quite human in structure. Its hands had 5 fingers with opposable thumbs, ending in thick, curved nails that weren't quite claws but definitely not human nails either. What struck me most was its eyes, dark amber irises surrounding pupils that reflected the torchlight. They studied me with an awareness that transcended species, an ancient consciousness evaluating a younger, less experienced being. "They are unharmed," it said, the voice rumbling from deep in its chest, rough but understandable. The same voice from my dream. They trespassed in the sacred place, disturbed what should not be disturbed. I struggled to process what was happening. A creature of legend speaking English in a hidden cave. Part of me wondered if I too was in some kind of hallucination or dream. "What sacred place?" I managed to ask. "The Whisper Grove?" It inclined its massive head. "The Gateway Stone. They tried to take offerings that were not theirs." I glanced back at the Donovans. "They're hikers, tourists. They probably didn't understand the significance." "Ignorance does not excuse theft from the sacred," the creature replied. "But they did not come with malice, so their punishment is temporary. They sleep, they dream of their transgressions. When they wake, they will understand." "And the others?" I asked, remembering Joseph's words about 3 missing hikers. "The ones who never returned?" A change came over the being's face, something like grim satisfaction. "Those who came with darkness in their hearts, who sought to desecrate the sacred places, to hunt what should not be hunted. They were judged." A chill ran through me. "You killed them?" "I am Shadow Walker," it said, as if that explained everything. "Guardian of boundaries, keeper of balance. I do what must be done to protect what was entrusted to my kind when your kind was young." Rain began to pound outside the cave, the sound echoing through the chambers. Occasional lightning flashes penetrated even here, creating momentary stark illumination. "The Australian guides, they're good people," I said. "Please let me take them back. I'll make sure they understand. They won't return." The creature regarded me silently for a long moment. "You are different from the others who have come to watch the forest. You listen. You feel the old connections." "I'm just doing my job," I said, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. "Your job," it repeated, sounding almost amused. "Your people create imaginary boundaries and call yourselves protectors of what you barely understand." It gestured to the torches. "We have tended these forests since before your kind learned to make such fire, before you built cities and forgot how to hear the earth speak. We're trying to preserve the wilderness," I argued. "That's what the Forest Service does. Preserve." Shadow Walker made a sound that might have been laughter. "You cannot preserve what you are separate from. You can only participate in its life or participate in its destruction." The philosophical debate seemed surreal given the circumstances, but I sensed it was important, a test of sorts. "Then help me participate correctly," I said. "Teach me what you know about this forest. I want to understand." Something shifted in the creature's posture, a subtle relaxation, a tentative acceptance. "The storm grows dangerous above," it said, changing the subject. "You will remain here until it passes. Then you may take the sleepers back to your dwelling. They will wake by nightfall." As if to emphasize its point, a crash of thunder shook the cavern, dislodging small stones from the ceiling. I nodded acceptance, then asked, "Why did you show yourself to me? Why bring me here?" Shadow Walker moved to one of the tunnel walls where crude pictographs had been painted. Images of tall, fur-covered figures walking alongside smaller human shapes. Some appeared to be hunting together. Others engaged in what might have been ceremonies around circular shapes that could represent the Whisper Grove. My kind has always had watchers among your kind, it explained. Those who understand both worlds, who maintain balance. It turned its penetrating gaze back to me. The last watcher grows old. A new one must be chosen. Joseph. It had to be referring to Joseph. You want me to be this watcher? I asked incredulously. You were called here, it stated simply. You heard the call in your dreams long before you came. The forest chose you. The statement resonated with unexpected truth. I'd been drawn to this specific wilderness, this specific job posting, without fully understanding why. The dreams of running through the forest had started months before I'd arrived. What would this role require? I asked cautiously. To observe, to listen, to intervene when humans threaten the sacred places, to speak for those who cannot speak in human tongues. It gestured to the sleeping Australians, to teach respect to those who come without understanding. And if I refuse? Shadow Walker's expression didn't change, but the air in the cavern seemed to grow heavier. Then the balance weakens further, more will be lost. The barriers between worlds grow thinner. Things long contained may break through. The threat was implicit but clear. This wasn't simply about protecting nature reserves or endangered species. This was about maintaining some cosmic balance I didn't fully comprehend. Before I could respond, a distant sound echoed through the cave system. Human voices calling my name. The search team Barrett had sent must have arrived at the outpost, found my note, and followed my trail. Shadow Walker's head turned sharply toward the sound. Others come. You must choose now. Will you watch? Will you listen? Will you speak? The voices grew louder. I had moments before they would find the cave entrance. Looking at the pictographs, at the sleeping hikers, at this impossible being standing before me, I made my decision. I will watch, I said. I will listen. I will speak for the forest. Shadow Walker nodded once, seemingly satisfied. Then take the sleepers and go. Tell the others you found them sheltering from the storm. Tell them nothing of what you have seen here. And after? Return to the Whisper Grove when the moon is full. Come alone. The teaching will begin. It began to retreat into the shadows. Remember, Watcher, the forest hears your thoughts. It knows your heart. It will not tolerate betrayal. With that, it vanished into a tunnel at the back of the cavern, leaving me alone with the unconscious hikers and a jumble of unanswered questions. Moments later, voices echoed directly outside the cave entrance. I called out to guide the search team to me, hurriedly constructing a plausible story about finding the Donovans sheltering from the storm. As rangers rushed in with stretchers and emergency gear, I glanced toward the dark tunnel where Shadow Walker had disappeared. A pair of amber eyes flashed briefly in the darkness, watching, evaluating, remembering. I had made my choice. I was now the Watcher, standing between two worlds, the world of humans, with their rules and boundaries, and the ancient world of Shadow Walker, with laws older than human memory. The forest had called, and I had answered. What that would mean for my future, I couldn't begin to imagine. But as we carried the still unconscious Australians out into the rain-soaked forest, I felt the weight of countless unseen eyes upon us, and knew that nothing would ever be the same. Thunder Lake was no longer just my assigned post. It was my destiny, my responsibility, my sacred trust. And somewhere in the depths of the forest, Shadow Walker would be waiting when the moon grew full, ready to initiate me into secrets as old as the ancient cedars of the Whisper Grove. The moment I set eyes on Lake Wenana, I knew I had made a terrible mistake accepting this post. It wasn't the isolation that bothered me. After all, I'd specifically requested a remote assignment. After 3 years as a ranger at Mount Rainier National Park, dealing with endless tourist questions and parking violations, I was ready for something more authentic, something that would test me. But as my battered Ford Ranger crawled along the final stretch of unpaved road, the dense wall of ancient cedars suddenly broke to reveal the still black waters of Lake Wenana stretching before me, and an inexplicable feeling of dread settled in my gut. Wanana was derived from a Salish word meaning shadow waters. According to the briefing packet I'd been given, the native tribes who once inhabited this region of the Passaitan wilderness believed the lake was a sacred place, a threshold between worlds. They spoke of it with reverence and fear. Now I understood why. The ranger cabin sat on a small ridge overlooking the eastern shore. It was more substantial than I'd expected. A sturdy structure built in the 1930s by the Civilian Conservation Corps, with rough-hewn logs blackened by decades of Pacific Northwest rain. A small dock extended into the water, where an aluminum boat was secured, gently bobbing in the wind-driven ripples. As I pulled up to the cabin, Ranger Sullivan emerged from the doorway. He was a grizzled veteran of the Forest Service, weeks away from retirement after 30 years of service. His sunburned face creased into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes as he approached my truck. "So you're the new blood," he said, extending a calloused hand as I stepped out. "Thought they'd send someone older." "I requested the assignment," I replied, shaking his hand firmly. 2 years at Olympic and 3 at Rainier. I wanted something quieter. Sullivan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Well, you got it. 50 miles to the nearest town. No cell service, just the radio for emergencies." He gestured toward the cabin. "Solar panels for basic power, propane for heat and cooking, water from the well out back. It's good. Comes from deep underground." I nodded, taking it all in. "How many visitors do you usually get?" Sullivan's laugh was short and harsh. "Not many. Occasional hikers in summer, hunters in the fall, though they're not supposed to be here. This isn't exactly a tourist destination." "That's fine by me." "Is it?" Sullivan studied me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "You know, most rangers request transfers out of here after a season. Some don't even last that long." "I'm not most rangers," he snorted. "That's what they all say." He turned toward the cabin. "Come on, I'll show you around." The interior was simple but functional. A main room with a wood stove, small kitchen area, and a desk with maps and logbooks. A bedroom with a twin bed and dresser, and a small bathroom with a shower that Sullivan warned only provided hot water when the sun's been cooperating. A generator sat outside for emergency power, though fuel had to be brought in by truck. "Your main job is monitoring," Sullivan explained as he showed me the patrol routes on a topographical map spread across the desk. "Check the trails for debris, maintain the boundary markers, keep an eye out for fires, standard stuff." "What about wildlife?" Sullivan hesitated. "We've got black bears, obviously, mountain lions, the usual predators, nothing you haven't dealt with before." Something in his tone made me probe further. "Anything unusual I should know about?" His weather-beaten face remained neutral, but I noticed his fingers tighten slightly on the edge of the map. "There have been incidents over the years." "What kind of incidents?" "Missing hikers, mostly. People who venture off trail and get lost. It happens in any wilderness area." "But," Sullivan sighed, rolling up the map with deliberate care, "but the ones who do turn up don't always make sense of what happened to them. They talk about being followed, watched, strange sounds at night." I raised an eyebrow. "Bears can be pretty intimidating to inexperienced hikers." "That's what the official reports say." He placed the map in a metal tube and secured it in a cabinet. "Just keep your wits about you, especially at night, and stay out of the northern basin." "The northern basin?" Sullivan pointed through the window to where the lake curved around a densely forested peninsula. "Beyond that point, it's restricted, environmental study area." "What are they studying?" "Above my pay grade." He checked his watch. "I need to head out if I'm going to make it to Winthrop before dark. The radio procedure is in the manual. Check in with headquarters every morning at 0800 and again at 1700. Any questions?" I had dozens, but something told me Sullivan wasn't going to provide satisfying answers. I shook my head. "Good." He grabbed his duffel bag from beside the door. "One more thing. If you hear anything unusual at night, stay inside, no matter what it sounds like." With that cryptic warning, Sullivan departed, the sound of his truck fading into the distance until all I could hear was the whisper of wind through the cedars and the gentle lapping of water against the shore. I spent the remainder of the afternoon familiarizing myself with the cabin and its surroundings. The logbooks were meticulously maintained, documenting weather conditions, wildlife sightings, and the occasional visitor. Sullivan had been diligent, but I noticed gaps in the entries during the winter months. Sometimes weeks would pass without a single note. As darkness fell, I lit the wood stove and prepared a simple dinner from the supplies I'd brought. The cabin creaked and settled around me, the sounds amplified in the profound silence of the wilderness. Through the window, the moonlight cast a silver path across the lake surface, illuminating wisps of fog that drifted like phantoms above the water. I was just about to turn in for the night when I heard it, a long, mournful cry echoing across the lake. It wasn't quite a howl, nor was it the scream of a mountain lion. It was something in between, with an almost human quality that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. Remembering Sullivan's warning, I extinguished the lantern and moved to the window. The moonlight revealed nothing unusual along the shoreline or in the surrounding forest. But as I watched, the fog on the lake seemed to thicken and coalesce, forming shapes that moved against the wind before dissolving back into formless mist. The cry came again, closer this time. Then silence, broken only by the irregular tempo of my heartbeat. I told myself it was just the wind playing tricks, or perhaps a loon, though Sullivan hadn't mentioned loons in his wildlife inventory. I checked the locks on the doors and windows before climbing into bed, drawing the blankets tight around me despite the warmth from the wood stove. Sleep came eventually, but it was restless and plagued by dreams of dark waters and half-glimpsed shapes moving through the trees. In one particularly vivid nightmare, I found myself standing on the dock, staring into the depths of the lake. Something enormous moved beneath the surface, circling slowly before rising toward me. I tried to back away, but my feet were rooted to the weathered planks. Just as a vast, shadowy form was about to break the surface, I awoke with a gasp. Dawn was breaking, pale light filtering through the curtains. I lay still for a moment, listening. The cabin was quiet except for the occasional pop from the dying embers in the wood stove. I rose and moved to the window, pulling aside the curtain to survey the lake. The water was calm, reflecting the pinkish glow of the morning sky. Nothing seemed amiss, until I noticed the footprints on the shore. They started at the water's edge and led directly to the cabin, stopping just below my window. They were huge, at least 16 inches long, and deeply impressed in the wet soil. The stride length was enormous, suggesting whatever made them stood well over 7 feet tall. My first instinct was to dismiss them as a prank, Sullivan's parting gift, perhaps. But as I studied them more closely through the window, I knew no human could have made these prints. The shape was all wrong, wider at the front with 5 distinct toe impressions, narrowing to a rounded heel. They resembled a human footprint only in the most general sense. I grabbed my camera and hurried outside, careful to avoid disturbing the tracks. The morning air was crisp and heavy with moisture, the scent of cedar and pine mingling with the earthy aroma of the lake. I photographed the prints from multiple angles, placing my own boot next to one for scale. The difference was disturbing. Following the tracks backward, I found where they emerged from the water. Following them forward, they stopped abruptly beneath my window, as if whatever made them had stood there watching me sleep. There were no tracks leading away. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the morning temperature. I wasn't alone out here. Something had visited in the night, something large enough to leave prints that dwarfed my own. I knew what the locals would call it, what any cryptozoology enthusiast would immediately suggest. But I was a ranger, trained in wildlife biology. I didn't believe in monsters or myths. At least, I didn't before Lake Wanana. The radio crackled to life precisely at 0800. Wanana Station, this is Northwest Dispatch. Morning check-in, over. I grabbed the handset, hesitating. Should I report the footprints? My scientific training battled with what I'd seen with my own eyes. Northwest Dispatch, this is Wanana Station. All normal here, I finally responded. Weather clear, temperature approximately 45 degrees. No incidents to report. Copy that, Wanana. Sullivan make it out okay? Yes, he departed yesterday evening. Welcome to Solitude, Ranger. Remember, morning and evening check-ins are mandatory. Miss 2 in a row and we send a helicopter. Anything else to report? My eyes drifted to the window where I could still see the massive footprints in the soil. No, nothing else. Copy that. Northwest dispatch out. I replaced the handset and stood there for a long moment, questioning my decision. The rational part of my brain insisted there must be a logical explanation for the tracks. Perhaps some unknown species of bear walking on its hind legs, or even an elaborate prank. But deep down, I knew neither explanation fit what I'd seen. After a quick breakfast, I grabbed my pack, sidearm, and camera, determined to investigate. The patrol route Sullivan had shown me covered most of the southern portion of the lake and the surrounding forest, but deliberately avoided the northern basin, the restricted area he'd mentioned. The tracks led in that direction. I followed the shoreline, moving cautiously and stopping frequently to listen. The forest was alive with normal sounds, the chatter of squirrels, the distant drumming of woodpeckers, the rustle of wind through the canopy. Yet there was an underlying tension, a sense of being observed that I couldn't shake. About a mile from the cabin, I found another set of the massive prints, these emerging from the forest and leading into the water. They were fresher than the ones near the cabin, the edges still crisp. Whatever made them had entered the lake not long ago. I photographed these as well, then scanned the opposite shore with my binoculars. Nothing moved along the tree line, but as I panned across the peninsula that separated the main lake from the northern basin, I caught a glimpse of something unusual, a flash of metal among the trees. Adjusting the focus, I could make out what appeared to be some sort of structure, partially concealed by the dense vegetation. It wasn't on any of Sullivan's maps. My curiosity overrode my caution. I returned to the cabin, retrieved the aluminum boat, and set out across the lake. The water was deeper than I expected, the surface like black glass reflecting the encircling mountains. Occasionally, ripples would form with no apparent cause, as if something large was moving deep below. As I approached the peninsula, the sense of being watched intensified. The forest here was older, the trees massive and draped with hanging moss that stirred in the absence of wind. I secured the boat to a fallen log and proceeded on foot, moving as quietly as possible. The structure was approximately half a mile inland, a small, windowless building constructed of concrete and metal, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. A heavy padlock secured the gate, and signs warned, "Government property, no unauthorized access, violators will be prosecuted." There were no identifying markings to indicate which government agency operated the facility, no vehicles, and no signs of recent human activity. The whole setup reminded me of the remote monitoring stations used by the USGS to track seismic activity, except those didn't typically require security fencing or look like miniature bunkers. I circled the perimeter, keeping a safe distance. On the far side, I discovered a clearing where the forest had been cut back to create a small helicopter landing pad. The painted markings faded, but still visible. Whatever this place was, it was accessed primarily by air. As I prepared to leave, something caught my eye. A motion-activated camera mounted on one of the fence posts, its lens pointed directly at me. A red light blinked steadily, indicating it was recording, so much for remaining unnoticed. I retreated into the forest, intending to return to my boat, but as I navigated through the dense underbrush, I realized I'd lost my bearings. The canopy was so thick here that I couldn't see the sun to orient myself. I reached for my compass only to find it spinning erratically, unable to fix on magnetic north. For the first time, genuine alarm took hold. I was an experienced ranger, well-trained in wilderness navigation. Getting lost like this shouldn't happen. I forced myself to remain calm, listening for the sound of the lake. Water carries sound, and I hadn't gone far enough to lose audio contact with the lapping waves. But the forest was unnaturally silent. No birds called, no squirrels chattered. Even the insects had fallen quiet. The only sound was my own breathing and the soft crunch of pine needles beneath my boots. Then I heard it, a heavy footfall behind me, followed by another. Something large was moving through the forest, paralleling my path. I turned slowly, hand dropping to my sidearm. The undergrowth parted about 50 yards away, and for a brief moment, I saw it. A massive, dark figure standing upright among the trees. It was at least 8 feet tall, covered in what appeared to be dark, matted fur. Its proportions were vaguely human but wrong somehow. The arms too long, the shoulders too broad. Before I could fully process what I was seeing, it stepped backward into the deeper shadows and was gone. My heart hammered against my ribs. Fight or flight took over, and I crashed through the forest in what I hoped was the direction of the lake. Branches slashed at my face, roots threatened to trip me, but pure adrenaline kept me moving. I burst through the tree line at the shore, but in a different location from where I'd left my boat. Scanning frantically in both directions, I spotted it about a quarter-mile to the south. I sprinted along the rocky beach, expecting at any moment to feel powerful hands close around me from behind. When I reached the boat, I shoved it into the water and scrambled aboard, not stopping to remove my boots or roll up my pants. The outboard motor coughed twice before catching, and I angled the boat toward the distant cabin, pushing the small engine to its limits. Halfway across, I cut the motor and drifted, watching the peninsula through my binoculars. The shoreline remained empty. If whatever I'd seen had pursued me, it remained hidden among the trees. But as I prepared to restart the engine, something large broke the surface of the water about 100 yards away. It was gone before I could focus my binoculars. Just a dark shape that rolled smoothly back beneath the surface, leaving concentric ripples expanding outward. I revved the engine to full throttle, no longer caring about noise or appearances. The boat skimmed across the water, bouncing painfully over its own wake. When I finally reached the cabin's dock, I secured the boat with trembling hands and retreated inside, locking the door behind me. At the desk, I opened the logbook, intending to document my experience, but as the pen hovered over the blank page, I hesitated. What exactly had I seen? A bear? A moose? My rational mind grasped for explanations, but none fit the figure I'd glimpsed in the forest. And what about the structure on the peninsula? Its presence raised more questions than answers. Was it monitoring the lake, the surrounding forest, or something else entirely? In the end, I made a simple entry. Investigated northern peninsula, discovered restricted federal installation. Wildlife abundant but cautious. Not a lie, but far from the complete truth. As evening approached, I radioed in for my mandatory check-in, again reporting that all was normal. After signing off, I stood at the window watching the light fade from the sky, casting the lake into deepening shadow. In the gathering darkness, I could almost convince myself that the day's events had been a product of isolation and an overactive imagination. Almost. I secured the cabin for the night, checking and rechecking the locks. I cleaned my sidearm and left it on the bedside table within easy reach. Outside, an owl called. Its mournful hooting carried on the night breeze. Ordinary forest sounds. But as I settled into bed, the same cry I'd heard the previous night echoed across the lake, that strange, not quite human howl that seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was answered by another, more distant cry from somewhere deep in the forest. They weren't hunting calls or territorial warnings. They sounded almost like communication. Sleep eluded me for hours, my mind replaying the glimpse of that tall, dark figure among the trees. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were filled with shadowy forms moving beneath the black waters of Lake Wanana, rising toward the surface with purpose. I awoke to the sound of something heavy moving around the exterior of the cabin. Wood creaked as weight shifted against the walls. Through the window I could see it was still dark, the forest illuminated only by the faint light of a waning moon. The scratching came next, slow, deliberate drags along the outer logs, as if something with long claws was testing the structure's integrity. It moved methodically around the perimeter, pausing occasionally as if listening. I lay frozen in bed, the blankets pulled to my chin, hardly daring to breathe. My hand crept toward the sidearm on the bedside table, fingers closing around the grip. When the scratching reached the window, I caught a glimpse of movement, a massive silhouette briefly visible against the night sky. Then came a soft, rhythmic tapping on the glass, almost like knuckles rapping gently for attention. I remained motionless, gun trained on the window, heart pounding so loudly I was certain whatever was outside could hear it. The tapping stopped. Long moments passed in silence. Then, from just outside the wall nearest my head came a sound that sent ice through my veins. A low, rumbling vocalization that was almost, but not quite, words. It rose and fell in a pattern that suggested language, but unlike any I'd ever heard. It was trying to speak. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. Morning revealed new tracks around the cabin, deeper than before. Whatever had circled the structure in the night was even larger than I'd initially thought. The scratches on the outer walls were clearly visible, long parallel grooves in the weathered wood, some as high as 9 feet above the ground. Most disturbing were the markings on a large cedar tree at the edge of the clearing. The bark had been stripped away in a deliberate pattern, creating what appeared to be a crude symbol, a vertical line bisected by 3 horizontal slashes. It hadn't been there the day before. I spent the morning securing the cabin further, checking for weak points and ensuring all entrances were reinforced. As I worked, I tried to process what was happening. My scientific training warred with what I was experiencing. Logic insisted there must be a rational explanation, perhaps a rogue bear with unusual behaviors, or even someone in a costume attempting to frighten me away. But neither explanation accounted for the intelligence behind the scratching pattern, the deliberate creation of symbols, or the vocalizations that seemed designed to communicate. At 0800, I made my scheduled radio check-in, again reporting all normal. I considered mentioning the tracks and scratches but held back. Without context, it would sound like I was either lying or losing my mind. I needed more concrete evidence. After the call, I reviewed the photographs I'd taken of the footprints. They remained unexplainable by conventional wildlife biology. The shape, size, and stride length matched no known species in the Pacific Northwest. Yet they were real. I hadn't imagined them. My thoughts turned to the restricted installation on the peninsula. Was there a connection? The facility's presence in such a remote location couldn't be coincidental. It had to be monitoring something, and given its position overlooking the northern basin, that something was likely in or around the lake. I needed more information, but my unplanned visit had almost certainly been recorded by the security camera. Someone knew I'd been there. Would they come to investigate, or were they already watching me? The radio crackled unexpectedly, making me jump. Wanona Station, this is Northwest Dispatch, over. Strange. They never called outside scheduled check-ins unless there was an emergency. I grabbed the handset. Northwest Dispatch, this is Wanona Station, over. We're patching through a call from Regional Command. Stand by. There was a burst of static, then a new voice, deeper, more authoritative. Wanona Station, this is Regional Director Blackwood. We've received reports of unauthorized activity in a restricted area under your jurisdiction. Can you confirm? My mouth went dry. Sir, I conducted a standard patrol of the area yesterday, and may have inadvertently crossed into a marked restricted zone. I was establishing my boundaries. That area is clearly marked on your maps as off-limits, Ranger. It's a sensitive research installation. May I ask what kind of research is being conducted there? There was a pause. That information is classified. However, I can tell you it's a long-term environmental monitoring project. Has there been any unusual activity in your area recently? Any wildlife disturbances? The scratches on the cabin walls flashed in my mind. The footprints. The dark shape in the forest. Nothing significant to report, sir. Another pause, longer this time. I see. A research team will be arriving by helicopter tomorrow to inspect the installation. They'll need access to your cabin as a base of operations. Please make the necessary preparations. Understood, sir. One more thing, Ranger. For your own safety, maintain your distance from the northern basin. If you observe any unusual wildlife, do not approach. Report it immediately through secure channels. Is that clear? Crystal clear, sir. Regional Command out. The radio fell silent, leaving me with more questions than answers. They were coming tomorrow, not just to check the installation, but to check on me. And what did Blackwood mean by unusual wildlife? He knew something. They were monitoring something specific. The rest of the day passed in tense preparation. I cleaned the cabin, organized my notes, and secured the photographs I'd taken. If the research team was looking for evidence that I'd seen something, they wouldn't find it easily. By evening, low clouds had rolled in, bringing a light drizzle that shrouded the lake in mist. The falling darkness seemed more oppressive than usual, the shadows deeper and more substantial. I completed my evening check-in, then heated a can of stew on the propane stove, my appetite diminished by the day's events. As I ate, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being observed. The cabin's windows, now revealing only my own reflection against the night, seemed to conceal watching eyes beyond the glass. Occasionally the mist would shift, forming shapes that dissolved when I tried to focus on them. I was nearly finished with my meal when the power went out. The solar system should have provided enough stored energy to last through the night, even without direct sunlight during the day. I lit a kerosene lantern and checked the electrical panel. No obvious issues there. Moving to the window, I peered out at the small shed that housed the batteries and inverter. The security light that normally illuminated it was dark, but in the glow from my lantern, I could see the shed door standing open, swinging gently in the breeze. I definitely hadn't left it that way. My sidearm felt reassuring against my hip as I pulled on a rain jacket and stepped onto the porch, lantern held high. The rain had intensified, driven by gusts of wind that sent sheets of water across the clearing. Visibility was poor, the lantern's glow creating a small bubble of light surrounded by impenetrable darkness. I moved cautiously toward the shed, scanning the tree line for movement. Nothing seemed amiss until I reached the small structure and looked inside. The battery connections had been deliberately severed, the heavy cables pulled apart with significant force. No animal could have done this. It was too precise, too targeted. Someone or something had intentionally cut power to the cabin. A branch snapped in the forest, the sound carrying clearly despite the rain. I spun toward it, hand dropping to my weapon. "Hello?" I called, immediately regretting making my position known. "This is a federal ranger station. Identify yourself." No response came from the darkness. But as I swept the lantern in a slow arc, the light briefly caught a pair of eyes reflecting at the forest's edge, large, widely spaced, and positioned at a height that could only belong to something standing well over 7 feet tall. They blinked once, then vanished. I backed toward the cabin, keeping the lantern extended to maximize my field of vision. The rain plastered my hair to my scalp, running in rivulets down my face and neck. Each step seemed to take an eternity, the distance to the safety of the cabin stretching impossibly. When my foot hit the bottom porch step, I heard it. That same vocalization from the previous night, but louder now, more insistent. It came from directly behind me. I whirled, drawing my weapon in the same motion. The lantern swung wildly, casting chaotic shadows that seemed to move independently of the light source. For a brief, terrifying moment, the illumination fell on a massive figure standing at the edge of the clearing, broad-shouldered, covered in dark fur matted by the rain, its face concealed by shadow but its eyes reflecting the lantern's glow with an almost human intelligence. Then it was gone, melting into the darkness with surprising speed for something so large. I didn't wait to see if it would return. I bolted into the cabin, slammed the door, and threw both locks. My hands shook so badly I could barely manage the simple task. Without power, the cabin's interior was cold and unwelcoming, the shadows beyond my lantern's reach deep and alive with imagined movement. I placed the light on the table and retrieved my satellite phone from my pack, the emergency device I'd been instructed to use only in genuine crises. This qualified. I dialed the emergency contact number, but before it could connect, the signal died. No service. Even the satellite connection, which should have functioned regardless of my remote location, was somehow blocked. Outside, something heavy circled the cabin. I could hear its footsteps in the wet soil, the occasional brush of what might have been a hand against the outer walls. It was testing the structure, looking for weaknesses. I retreated to the bedroom, weapon ready, back against the wall furthest from the windows. The rain intensified, hammering on the roof like impatient fingers. Thunder rumbled in the distance, momentarily drowning out the sounds of whatever stalked the perimeter. But when the thunder faded, a new sound emerged, a rhythmic tapping on the bedroom window, too deliberate to be caused by the storm. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. I raised my gun, aiming at the window. "Go away," I shouted, my voice cracking with strain. "Leave me alone." The tapping stopped abruptly. Silence stretched, broken only by the rain and my own ragged breathing. Then, softly at first but growing steadily louder, came a sound that froze my blood, a series of vocalizations that unmistakably mimicked my own words. "Go away, leave alone." The voice was deep, guttural, the words mangled but recognizable. It wasn't just mimicry. There was intent behind it, a crude attempt at communication. "What are you?" I whispered, though I knew the question was absurd. Whatever was outside couldn't possibly answer in a way I'd understand, but it tried. "Winona," came the growled response. Then again, more insistently, "Winona," the name of the lake, or perhaps what it really meant, shadow waters, the threshold between worlds. A massive fist hammered against the window frame, rattling the glass in its mounting. The creature, because I could no longer pretend it was anything else, was growing impatient. I backed further away, pressing myself into the corner, weapon trained on the window. If the glass broke, if it came through, but it didn't. The pounding stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Footsteps retreated, heavy splashes indicating movement toward the lake. Then silence, save for the relentless percussion of the rain. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I maintained my vigil in the corner, jumping at every creak of the cabin's timbers, every gust of wind that moaned through the eaves. The lantern burned steadily, creating a small haven of light in the darkness, but its fuel wouldn't last forever. Dawn arrived with aching slowness, the gray light of morning gradually revealing an empty clearing around the cabin. No massive figure lurked at the tree line. No eyes watched from the shadows. But the evidence of the night's visitor remained. New footprints in the mud, deeper than before. And something else. A crude arrangement of broken branches on the porch, forming the same symbol that had been carved into the cedar tree. A message, a warning, or an invitation. The helicopter arrived precisely at noon, its rhythmic thump-thump-thump growing steadily louder until it appeared over the tree line, a sleek black shape against the overcast sky. It circled the cabin once before settling onto the small clearing near the dock, its rotors whipping the lake into frothy wavelets. I stood on the porch, watching as 4 figures disembarked. 3 men and a woman, all dressed in identical dark rain gear with no identifying insignia. They carried equipment cases and duffel bags, moving with the coordinated efficiency of a team accustomed to working together. The apparent leader approached, while the others unloaded gear. He was tall and lean, with close-cropped gray hair and eyes that revealed nothing. "Ranger," he said by way of greeting, extending a hand. "Dr. Lawrence, Environmental Research Division." "Which department?" I asked, accepting the handshake. A flicker of amusement crossed his face. "Just, the department will do. These are my colleagues, Dr. Chen, Mr. Reyes, and Miss Bennett." The others nodded in acknowledgement, but remained focused on their tasks. None appeared particularly friendly. "You've lost power," Lawrence observed, glancing at the dark windows of the cabin. "Equipment failure during the storm last night," I replied, careful to keep my tone neutral. "The battery connections were damaged. We'll have our technician look at it." He studied me with clinical detachment. "Rough night?" I realized how I must appear. Unshaven, clothing rumpled, dark circles under my eyes from lack of sleep. "The storm kept me up," I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. Lawrence nodded, not quite believing me. "We'll need to use your cabin as a base of operations for the next few days. Regional Director Blackwood explained this." "He did. May I ask exactly what you're researching?" "Environmental anomalies," Lawrence replied vaguely. "Long-term ecological surveillance. Nothing that should interfere with your duties." Before I could press further, the woman, Bennett, approached, carrying what looked like a specialized scanner. "Site secure, Doctor," she reported. "No unauthorized signals or devices detected." Lawrence nodded. "Excellent. Ranger, perhaps you could show us inside?" The team efficiently transformed my simple cabin into an operations center. Electronic equipment appeared from their cases, filling the main room with screens, keyboards, and devices I couldn't identify. Reyes, the youngest member of the group, restored power within minutes, though he seemed puzzled by the damage to the battery connections. This wasn't equipment failure, he told Lawrence quietly, though I overheard from the kitchen where I was preparing coffee. The cables were forcibly separated. Something strong did this. Lawrence's eyes flicked toward me momentarily. Document it and repair the damage. Full security protocol. Chen, a slight man with wire-rimmed glasses, established a satellite uplink that seemed far more powerful than standard communications gear. Within an hour, they had created a self-contained command post, complete with monitoring equipment pointed toward the northern basin. I tried to make myself useful, answering questions about the local terrain and weather patterns, all while observing their operation. They were clearly not standard environmental researchers. Their equipment, their demeanor, the practiced way they secured the perimeter, these were the hallmarks of a military or intelligence operation. As evening approached, Lawrence and Bennett prepared to depart for the installation on the peninsula, leaving Chen and Reyes to monitor the equipment. I offered to guide them, mentioning my previous visit to the site. "That won't be necessary," Lawrence replied, checking a compact GPS unit. "We know the way." "The terrain can be disorienting," I persisted. "Compasses don't work reliably near the northern basin." This caught Lawrence's attention. "You've noticed magnetic anomalies, among other things?" His eyes narrowed. "What exactly have you observed since arriving, Ranger?" I hesitated, weighing my options. These people knew more than they were revealing. If I wanted answers, I needed to show some of my cards. "Unusual tracks around the cabin," I said carefully. "Large, bipedal, not consistent with known wildlife. And last night something deliberately disabled the power and attempted to communicate." Bennett and Lawrence exchanged glances. "Communicate how?" Bennett asked, her professional detachment slipping slightly. "Vocalization, mimicry of human speech, and symbols, arrangements of branches in specific patterns." Lawrence's expression hardened. "You should have reported this immediately through proper channels." "To whom?" "Regional Director Blackwood, who didn't see fit to warn me what I was dealing with. Or perhaps to Ranger Sullivan, who left me with cryptic warnings but no actual information." "You weren't briefed because you didn't need to know," Lawrence replied coldly. "Your job is to maintain the ranger station and report unusual activities. Nothing more." "Well, I'm reporting now," I countered. "Something is out there, something intelligent, and I think you know exactly what it is." A tense silence followed, broken only by the soft beep of the monitoring equipment. Finally, Lawrence sighed. "Miss Bennett, please continue preparations for our departure. I need a private word with the ranger." Bennett hesitated, then nodded, moving outside with her equipment pack. Lawrence turned to me, his authoritarian demeanor softening slightly. "What I'm about to tell you is classified, Ranger. Officially, this conversation never happened." "Understood." He lowered his voice, despite Chen and Reyes being occupied on the far side of the room. "Lake Wanana has been a research site for nearly 50 years. What began as a standard geological survey in the 1970s quickly became something else when the team encountered anomalous entities. Bigfoot, I said bluntly. Lawrence winced at the term. We avoid that particular nomenclature. We classify them as non-human intelligences, or NHIs. There's a small population in this region, perhaps the largest concentration in North America. How is that possible? How could they remain hidden for so long? They're intelligent, highly adaptable, and extremely territorial. They've learned to avoid human contact, with a few exceptions. He gestured toward the window. This area is ideal, remote, difficult to access, abundant food sources, and natural features that somehow interfere with technology and human perception. The magnetic anomalies, among other things. We believe they can manipulate their environment in ways we don't fully understand. It's why compasses fail, why satellite phones malfunction, why people become disoriented in the northern basin. I processed this information, trying to reconcile it with my scientific worldview. If you've known about them for decades, why keep it secret? The scientific significance alone— Lawrence cut me off. Can you imagine the consequences of public confirmation? The media circus? The hordes of cryptid hunters invading the wilderness? not to mention the philosophical and religious implications of another intelligent species sharing our planet. He had a point. The public revelation of such a discovery would be earth-shaking on multiple levels. "So what's your role?" I asked. "Observation? Containment?" "Protection," Lawrence replied, surprising me. "Both theirs and ours. We maintain this as a sanctuary of sorts, ensuring they remain undisturbed while preventing potentially dangerous interactions with humans. Most hikers or rangers who stumble upon evidence are easy to discredit. A few require more active management." The implication was clear. "Is that why rangers keep requesting transfers from this station? Are they being intimidated into leaving?" "Not by us," Lawrence said meaningfully. "The NHIs themselves prefer certain humans over others. They seem to tolerate some, actively avoid most, and occasionally become curious about individuals like yourself." Curious. It tried to break into the cabin last night. If it wanted to enter, it would have. They're testing you, assessing your intentions. The fact that you're still alive suggests they find you interesting. Before I could respond, Bennett appeared at the door. "Doctor, we need to depart now if we want to reach the installation before dark." Lawrence nodded. "We'll continue this discussion later, Ranger. In the meantime, I strongly suggest you remain in the cabin until we return. The NHIs are more active at night, and they may be agitated by our presence." With that, he joined Bennett outside, and the two departed along the shore toward the peninsula, quickly disappearing into the thick undergrowth. Chen and Reyes continued their work, largely ignoring me, except to request coffee or ask basic questions about the cabin's utilities. The monitoring equipment emitted occasional beeps and chirps, but they kept the screens angled away from my view. As darkness fell, I found myself watching the tree line through the window, half expecting to see massive shapes moving in the shadows. The forest remained still, but the sense of being observed was stronger than ever. "They're out there, aren't they?" I asked, breaking the silence. Reyes glanced up from his equipment. "Multiple signatures on thermal, at least 3 individuals maintaining distance but definitely watching." "They always watch," Chen added without looking up from his tablet. "It's what they do." "And this doesn't concern you?" Chen shrugged. "We're used to it. They rarely approach when we're here in numbers. They're cautious, especially around unfamiliar technology. But they approached me, alone." "You're new," Reyes explained. "They're establishing boundaries, determining if you're a threat. It's a standard pattern." "There's nothing standard about a creature that can mimic human speech and create symbolic messages," I countered. This earned me a sharp look from Chen. "They mimicked you? What exactly did they say?" I recounted the previous night's encounter, the repetition of my words, the utterance of "Wanauna," the pounding on the window. Chen's professional demeanor cracked slightly, revealing genuine excitement. "Fascinating. We've documented limited vocalization before, but direct mimicry of human speech is rare. They must be particularly interested in you." "Lucky me," I muttered. The satellite radio on their console crackled to life. "Base, this is Lawrence. We've reached the installation. All systems operational, but there are signs of recent NHI activity in the vicinity. Multiple track patterns, some fresh. They've been very active since the storm." "Confirmed," Reyes responded. "We're tracking 3 signatures around the cabin perimeter, maintaining approximately 200 meters distance. Keep me updated on any changes. We'll remain here overnight to collect data. Lawrence out." As the connection closed, the cabin lights flickered momentarily. Reyes and Chen immediately turned to their equipment, checking readings. "Power fluctuation," Chen reported, "but the backup systems are stable." "They're testing again," Reyes said quietly, "probing our defenses." "I thought you said they maintain their distance when you're here," I reminded them. "Usually," Chen acknowledged, "but they've been increasingly bold over the past year. Something's changed in their behavior patterns." "What kind of defenses do you have?" I asked, suddenly very interested in our security situation. Reyes pointed to small devices mounted in the corners of the cabin, things I'd initially mistaken for smoke detectors. "Acoustic deterrents. They emit frequencies that the NHIs find uncomfortable. Not harmful, just unpleasant enough to discourage close approach." "And if those fail?" Chen patted a hard-sided case beside his workstation. We have more direct countermeasures if necessary, but it rarely comes to that. The reassurance did little to calm my nerves. I checked my sidearm, ensuring it was loaded and accessible. Outside, the wind had picked up, driving light rain against the windows in irregular patterns. The forest sounds were muted, as if the wildlife sensed the tension and had retreated to safer locations. "What do they want?" I asked, more to myself than my companions. Chen looked up, his expression serious. "That's the question we've been trying to answer for decades. They were here long before us, living in isolation until human expansion began to encroach on their territory. Now they're caught between worlds, unable to fully retreat from human civilization, yet unwilling or unable to reveal themselves completely. Communication attempts have increased in frequency over the past 5 years, Reyes added. The branch symbols, rock arrangements, vocalization experiments, they're trying to establish contact on their terms. Or warning us away, I suggested. Perhaps both, Chen conceded. Their social structure and motivations remain largely unknown despite years of observation. We know they're highly intelligent, possess complex communication systems, and demonstrate remarkable adaptability. Beyond that, he shrugged. The lights flickered again, more pronounced this time. One of the monitoring devices emitted a sharp tone. "Movement," Reyes reported, studying a thermal display. "Their closing distance, all 3 signatures converging on the eastern perimeter." Chen activated a control on his console. A high-pitched whine, just at the edge of human hearing, emanated from the corner devices. I felt it more than heard it, a pressure in my ears that was mildly uncomfortable. "That should discourage them," Chen said confidently. But the thermal display told a different story. The signatures continued to approach, undeterred by the acoustic countermeasure. "Increase the frequency," Chen instructed. Reyes adjusted a dial, and the pressure in my ears intensified, making me wince. Still, the heat signatures advanced. "This isn't right," Reyes muttered. "They've never ignored the deterrence before." Chen reached for the hard-sided case, unlatching it to reveal what looked like modified flare guns. "We may need to—" The cabin plunged into darkness as the power failed completely. Even the battery backup systems went dead. The only illumination came from the faint glow of emergency chemical lights that automatically activated near the exits. In the sudden silence that followed, we could hear them clearly. Heavy footsteps circling the cabin, not just 3 sets, but many, moving with purpose and coordination. Something heavy dragged across the exterior wall, a deliberate slow scraping that raised the hairs on my neck. "Get down," Chen hissed, distributing the flare guns. "Away from the windows." We crouched in the center of the room, back to back, weapons ready. The scraping continued, moving systematically around the structure. Then came the vocalizations, deep, rumbling sounds that overlapped and intertwined, creating patterns that almost, but not quite, resembled language. "They're coordinating," Reyes whispered. "I've never seen them work together like this." The satellite radio remained silent. No contact from Lawrence and Bennett at the installation. We were on our own. A tremendous blow struck the front door, powerful enough to splinter the frame. Another followed, and the hinges began to separate from the wall. "If they breach, aim for the center mass," Chen instructed, his voice remarkably steady. "The flares won't kill them, but the light and heat will drive them back." The pounding intensified, the door buckling inward with each impact. Wood cracked, metal groaned, and for the first time, I genuinely believed I might not survive the night. But then, as suddenly as it had begun, the assault stopped. The vocalization ceased. The forest fell silent. We remained frozen in our defensive posture, waiting for the attack to resume. Minutes stretched into agonizing uncertainty. "What happened?" I finally whispered. Neither Chen nor Reyes had an answer. We maintained our position, unwilling to investigate, but unable to relax. The answer came with the distant thump of helicopter rotors. "Reinforcements," Chen breathed, relief evident in his voice. "Lawrence must have called for backup when we lost contact." The sound grew louder, and soon the clearing outside was illuminated by powerful searchlights mounted on a military-grade helicopter. The downdraft bent the surrounding trees, creating a maelstrom of wind and rain around the cabin. Voices shouted commands outside. Flashlight beams swept the perimeter. The cavalry had arrived. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The creatures, the NHIs, had been on the verge of breaching the cabin. Why retreat just because of an approaching helicopter? Based on everything I'd witnessed, they were intelligent enough to complete their assault before reinforcements arrived, unless that wasn't their objective at all. As armed personnel secured the area and restored emergency power to the cabin, I stared out the window at the dark forest beyond the helicopter's lights. What had they really wanted? Why coordinate such a show of force, only to withdraw at the critical moment? The answer, I suspected, lay somewhere in the northern basin, in the shadow waters of Lake Wanana, where worlds met and ancient intelligences waited. Dawn revealed the extent of the night's events. The cabin's door hung precariously from a single hinge, deep gouges marked the exterior walls, and massive footprints surrounded the structure in patterns suggesting at least 6 different individuals had participated in the assault. More disturbing were the symbols, dozens of them carved into tree trunks, arranged in stone patterns on the ground, even scratched into the cabin's window glass. All variations of the same motif, a vertical line intersected by 3 horizontal strokes. The reinforcements, a specialized security team of 8 personnel, under the command of a stone-faced woman who introduced herself only as captain, had established a defensive perimeter around the cabin. They carried military-grade weapons and moved with the practiced efficiency of Special Forces operators. Dr. Lawrence and Miss Bennett had returned from the installation at first light, both looking grim. Lawrence pulled me aside as the security team debriefed Chen and Reyes. The installation was a diversion, he explained, his voice low. While we were there, monitoring equipment recorded unusual activity in the northern basin. We believe they wanted to draw us away from the cabin. Why? I asked, still struggling to understand the creature's motivations. Lawrence hesitated. We're not entirely sure, but given the coordinated nature of their actions, they must have had a specific objective. Which was? He glanced toward the lake, expression troubled. Possibly you. Me? Why would they? As I mentioned yesterday, they sometimes develop an interest in specific individuals. Your reports of direct communication attempts suggest you've triggered their curiosity. Or their hostility. The two aren't mutually exclusive in their culture, Lawrence noted, but if they'd wanted to harm you, they could have easily done so before our arrival. Captain approached, cutting our conversation short. The perimeter is secure, Dr. Lawrence. No signs of immediate threat, but we've detected movement in the forest approximately 1 kilometer north. Maintaining distance but watching, Lawrence nodded. Typical behavior after an engagement. We should evacuate while we have the opportunity, she advised. The helicopter can transport everyone to the forward operating base. We can return with a full containment team if necessary. Lawrence considered this, then shook his head. Not yet. I want to understand why they've escalated to this degree. There must be a reason. With respect, Doctor, we can analyze their behavior from a safe distance. The risk of remaining is acceptable, Lawrence interrupted. We've been studying them for decades without a direct confrontation like this. Something has changed, and I need to know what. The captain clearly disapproved, but didn't argue further. As you wish, but my team will maintain combat readiness, and the helicopter will remain on standby for immediate extraction. After she departed, Lawrence turned back to me. I need your help, Ranger. You've had more direct interaction with them than anyone on our team. They've attempted communication with you specifically. What exactly do you want me to do? Help us understand what they're trying to convey. These symbols, the vocalizations, it's a language of sorts. We've documented similar patterns over the years, but never in such concentration. I studied one of the carvings on a nearby tree. This doesn't look like any Native American symbology I'm familiar with. It's not, Lawrence confirmed. At least, not exactly. There are similarities to some ancient pictographs found in caves throughout the Pacific Northwest, but these are distinct. And you think I can somehow interpret them? I think they want you to. Why else focus their communication efforts on your cabin, on you specifically? It was a fair question, but one I had no answer for. What did these creatures see in me that made them single me out? Throughout the day, the security team maintained their vigilant perimeter, while the researchers documented every symbol, footprint, and mark left by the nocturnal visitors. I assisted where I could, but mostly found myself studying the northern basin across the lake, drawn to it for reasons I couldn't articulate. As evening approached, Lawrence called a briefing in the cabin, now repaired enough to be functional, if not comfortable. Maps were spread across the table, monitoring equipment beeped softly in the background, and the security team maintained a visible presence outside. "We've analyzed the pattern of activity over the past 72 hours, Lawrence began, highlighting areas on the topographical map. The NHIs have been unusually active here, and here, all concentrated around the northern basin. Additionally, our underwater sensors have detected significant movement beneath the lake's surface." "Underwater," I interrupted. "These creatures swim?" "They're highly adapted to this environment," Lawrence explained. "We believe they use underwater caves and tunnels to move throughout the region, possibly accessing areas we can't easily monitor." "The lake reaches depths of over 300 feet in the northern basin," Chen added. "Sonar mapping suggests extensive cave systems beneath the surrounding mountains, many of which may connect to the lake." Lawrence pointed to a specific location on the map, a narrow inlet on the far side of the northern basin, almost entirely enclosed by steep cliffs. "This area has shown the most activity. We call it the threshold." "Threshold to what?" I asked. "That's what we've been trying to determine for decades," Lawrence admitted. "Native legends speak of Lake Wenana as a boundary between worlds, a place where the veil is thin. Scientifically, we've recorded unusual electromagnetic phenomena there, temporal anomalies and geological features that don't conform to standard models." "You're saying it's what, a doorway to another dimension?" Lawrence frowned at my skeptical tone. "I'm saying there are aspects of this location that defy conventional explanation. The NHIs seem drawn to it, particularly during certain lunar and solar cycles." "Like now," Chen interjected. "Tomorrow night's lunar phase coincides with a peak in the electromagnetic field fluctuations we've been monitoring." "Which may explain their increased activity," Lawrence concluded. "They're preparing for something." The captain, who had been listening silently from the doorway, spoke up. "All the more reason to evacuate before whatever they're preparing for happens." Lawrence shook his head. "This is precisely what we've been waiting years to observe. We're not leaving." "Then at least send the ranger out," she insisted. "He's not equipped for this level of engagement." All eyes turned to me, waiting for my response. I should have agreed with her, should have jumped at the chance to leave this increasingly dangerous situation, but something held me back, a compulsion I couldn't explain. "I'm staying," I heard myself say. "Whatever is happening, I'm part of it now. I need to see it through." Lawrence nodded, a hint of satisfaction in his expression. "Very well, we'll establish a forward observation post near the threshold tomorrow. If the pattern holds, we should be able to document whatever occurs tomorrow night." The briefing concluded, and the team dispersed to their assigned tasks. I stepped outside, needing fresh air and space to process the surreal turn my assignment had taken. The setting sun cast long shadows across the lake, the water still and black beneath a deepening purple sky. Movement at the forest's edge caught my eye. A dark figure, taller than any human, standing partially concealed among the trees. It made no attempt to hide, watching me with an intelligence I could feel even at this distance. Strangely, I felt no fear, only a profound curiosity that mirrored what I imagined the creature must feel toward me. For a long moment, we observed each other across the clearing, neither making any move to approach or retreat. Then it raised one massive arm, pointing deliberately toward the northern basin, before melting back into the forest. An invitation? A warning? Perhaps both. Either way, I knew with certainty that the answers I sought lay across the dark waters, at the place Lawrence had called the threshold. Whatever was going to happen there tomorrow night, I was meant to witness it. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the first frost of the season coating the grass and dock with a crystalline sheen that glittered in the early light. The lake was preternaturally still, like black glass reflecting the surrounding mountains with perfect clarity. Final preparations proceeded with military precision. The security team established a defensive position on a ridge overlooking the threshold, while the research team assembled their monitoring equipment in waterproof cases for transport across the lake. Lawrence assigned me to Bennett's boat, a small craft equipped with specialized sonar and underwater cameras. As we loaded the last of the gear, he pulled me aside one final time. "Whatever happens tonight, stay close to the security team," he instructed. "The NHIs have shown specific interest in you, which makes you both valuable to our observation and potentially vulnerable." "You still haven't told me why they've focused on me," I noted. Lawrence's expression was unreadable. "Some questions can only be answered through direct experience, Ranger. I believe you'll understand soon enough." With those cryptic words, he joined Captain in the lead boat, and our small flotilla set out across the lake toward the northern basin. The journey was silent, each person lost in their own thoughts, as we navigated through the narrow passage that separated the main lake from our destination. The threshold was even more imposing up close. Sheer cliffs rose directly from the water on three sides, creating a natural amphitheater around a small, crescent-shaped beach of black sand. The water here was impossibly clear despite its depth, revealing massive boulders on the lakebed arranged in what appeared to be deliberate patterns. We secured the boats along the narrow shore, and the security team immediately established a perimeter, setting up surveillance equipment aimed at both the surrounding cliffs and the water itself. The researchers assembled their instruments, Chen directing the placement of sensors along the waterline, while Reyes established a communications relay with the cabin. I found myself drawn to the center of the crescent beach, where a flat stone the size of a small table emerged from the sand. Its surface was covered with weathered carvings, the same three-line symbol we'd found at the cabin, but elaborated into complex interlocking patterns that radiated outward from a central point. "An altar of sorts," Lawrence said, appearing beside me. "We've carbon-dated organic material from the cracks to approximately 12,000 years ago. These symbols predate all known human settlements in the region." "You're suggesting these creatures have been here that long?" "Perhaps longer. The archaeological record is incomplete, but we've found similar markings in cave systems throughout the Pacific Northwest, always near water sources, and always oriented toward specific celestial alignments." He glanced at his watch. "We have several hours before sunset. I suggest you familiarize yourself with the area, but stay within visual range of the security team at all times." I spent the afternoon observing the researchers at work, occasionally assisting but mostly trying to make sense of my role in whatever was unfolding. The security team remained vigilant, though no signs of the creatures had been detected since our arrival. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, the atmosphere changed. The temperature dropped noticeably, and a thin mist formed across the water's surface, clinging to the lake in defiance of the light breeze. "It's starting," Chen announced, checking his instruments. "Electromagnetic fluctuations increasing, just as predicted." The mist thickened as darkness fell, transforming the threshold into a realm of shadows and indistinct forms. Lights were kept to a minimum, red filters on all flashlights to preserve night vision and reduce their visibility from a distance. The security team activated night vision equipment, their quiet reports confirming what we already sensed. We were being surrounded. Heat signatures appeared along the cliff tops, massive forms moving with deliberate stealth to positions overlooking our encampment. "At least 12 individuals," Captain reported, her voice tense but controlled. "More than we've ever documented in one location." Lawrence nodded, excitement evident despite the potential danger. "They're gathering for the event, just as we hypothesized." "What event?" I pressed, no longer willing to accept vague references. Before Lawrence could respond, a low, resonant sound echoed across the water. Not quite a howl, not quite a song, but something between the two. It was answered by another, then another, until the air vibrated with their calls, the acoustics of the enclosed basin amplifying and blending them into an otherworldly chorus. "Vocalization patterns consistent with previous recordings," Chen noted, adjusting his equipment to capture the sounds. "But the amplitude and coordination are unprecedented." The mist swirled and thickened, taking on a faint luminescence that cast everything in an ethereal blue glow. The water in the center of the basin began to move, gentle ripples at first, then more pronounced waves that radiated outward from a central point despite the absence of wind. Underwater activity, Bennett reported from her position at the sonar station. Multiple large objects ascending from depth. The security team tightened their formation around us, weapons ready but held low in a non-threatening posture. Captain's orders had been explicit. No offensive action unless directly attacked. The surface of the lake bulged upward, water cascading off a massive form as it rose from the depths. It wasn't one of the creatures, at least not as we'd seen them before. It was a structure of some kind, a megalithic arrangement of stones forming a rough archway that now broke the surface in the exact center of the basin. "The gate," Lawrence whispered, awe overriding his scientific detachment. "It's real." As the archway fully emerged, the vocalizations from the surrounding cliffs intensified, taking on a rhythmic quality that seemed to resonate with the very stones of the structure. The mist condensed around the arch, flowing through it like water in reverse, creating a shimmering curtain within its confines. "Electromagnetic readings off the scale," Chen reported, his instruments emitting warning tones. "Quantum fluctuations consistent with theoretical models of space-time distortion." Whatever scientific explanation Chen was attempting, it failed to capture the sheer otherness of what we were witnessing. The arch had become a doorway of sorts, the space within it no longer showing the backdrop of cliffs and night sky, but rather a swirling void of colors and patterns that hurt the eyes to look upon directly. Movement along the shoreline drew our attention. Massive figures emerged from the forest and descended the cliffs, approaching the water's edge. In the ethereal light of the mist, I could see them clearly for the first time, 8 feet tall or more, powerfully built, covered in dark fur that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. Their faces were almost human in structure, but with pronounced brow ridges, wide-set eyes that reflected the blue glow, and flattened noses above heavy jaws. They carried no weapons or tools, yet moved with a purpose and coordination that spoke of intelligence and social organization, far beyond what any wild creature should possess. One of them, larger than the others and with silver streaking its dark fur, approached the water's edge directly across from our position. It locked eyes with me, recognition evident in its gaze. "It knows you," Lawrence murmured, watching the exchange. "The same one that's been observing the cabin, I suspect." The creature broke our eye contact, turning toward the arch in the center of the lake. It raised its arms and emitted a series of complex vocalizations that reverberated across the water. The others joined in, creating a harmonic convergence that seemed to stabilize and intensify the phenomenon within the archway. The security team shifted nervously, but Captain maintained control with hand signals, keeping them in a defensive posture. The researchers worked feverishly, documenting every aspect of the unfolding event. "Look," Bennett gasped, pointing toward the arch. Shapes were visible within the swirling portal, indistinct at first, then resolving into silhouettes that approximated the creatures on the shore, yet subtly different in proportion and movement. They seemed to be approaching from the other side, reaching the threshold, but not crossing. The silver-streaked leader waded into the lake, moving with surprising grace through the chest-deep water toward the arch. When it reached the structure, it placed both massive hands on the stone pillars, throwing its head back in what appeared to be an expression of reverence or exultation. The portal flared brighter, the colors shifting rapidly. The shapes within it pressed closer, becoming more distinct with each passing moment. Hands, if they could be called that, reached out, nearly breaking the plane between worlds. "They're coming through," Lawrence stated, his scientific caution momentarily abandoned in the face of what we were witnessing. "After all these years of observation, we're finally seeing a full manifestation." But something was wrong. The creature at the arch suddenly stiffened, its posture changing from reverence to alarm. It turned toward us, and even across the distance I could see fear in its two human eyes. It wasn't the security team that had triggered this reaction, it was something else, something beyond our perception but clearly visible to the creatures. The silver-backed leader bellowed a warning call, and chaos erupted. The creatures on shore retreated toward the forest, their movements no longer measured but urgent, almost panicked. The one by the arch remained, torn between escape and some responsibility to the portal it had helped create. "What's happening?" I demanded, turning to Lawrence. His face had gone pale. "Something's coming through, something they didn't expect or want." The portal's color shifted to a deep, bloody red, the mist around it darkening and coiling like smoke. The water near the arch began to boil, steam rising in thick plumes that obscured our view. Captain made a decision. "All personnel, fall back to the boats. Prepare for immediate evacuation." The security team began a controlled withdrawal, covering the researchers as they hastily packed essential equipment, but I remained transfixed by the scene unfolding on the lake. The creature at the arch was struggling now, trying to close the portal by pushing the stone pillars together. But whatever force had been awakened was too strong. The archway held firm, and the red glow intensified, casting the creature's desperate efforts in a hellish light. It turned toward me once more, and in that moment I understood. The connection I'd felt, the reason for its interest in me. We were alike in some fundamental way, both guardians of a sort, both caught between worlds we barely understood. Without conscious decision, I found myself moving forward, wading into the cold water of Lake Wenana. Behind me, Lawrence shouted warnings, and Captain ordered her team to retrieve me, but they seemed distant, irrelevant. The creature and I approached the arch from opposite sides, meeting at the threshold between worlds. Up close, I could see intelligence and emotion in its eyes. Fear, yes, but also determination and something akin to recognition. It vocalized, not the threatening growls from the cabin, but something softer, almost pleading. Though I couldn't understand the specific meaning, the intent was clear. "Help me close it." The portal pulsed, the redness deepening as something massive and formless pressed against the barrier between worlds, seeking entry. The water around the arch churned and steamed, the temperature rising to near boiling despite the night's chill. I placed my hands on the stone pillar opposite the creature, feeling an electric tingle run up my arms. The creature mirrored my position, our eyes meeting across the threshold as we both pushed against the ancient stones. For a moment, nothing happened. The pressure from the other side intensified, the formless entity coalescing into something with too many limbs, too many eyes, its very existence an affront to the natural order of our world. Then, as if responding to our combined will, the archway began to move. The stone pillars grudgingly shifted, narrowing the opening. The entity on the other side redoubled its efforts, a high-pitched keening cutting through the night as it realized its opportunity was fading. With one final, desperate surge of strength, the creature and I pushed the pillars together, sealing the doorway between worlds. The red light flashed blindingly bright, then vanished entirely, plunging the basin into darkness, broken only by the flashlights of the security team converging on our position. The pressure wave knocked me backward, sending me underwater momentarily. When I surfaced, gasping for breath, the arch was gone, sunk back beneath the lake's surface, leaving only gentle ripples to mark where it had been. On the opposite shore, the creature regarded me for a long moment, its expression unreadable in the sudden darkness. Then it raised one hand in what seemed like a gesture of acknowledgement, perhaps even gratitude, before turning and disappearing into the forest with the others. The security team reached me, half dragging me back to shore where Lawrence waited, his expression a mixture of concern and scientific fascination. "What did you do?" he demanded as Captain's medic checked me for injuries. "What happened out there?" I struggled to find words that could encapsulate the experience. "We closed it," I finally said. "Whatever was trying to come through, it wasn't welcome. Not by them, not by us. So, we closed the door." Lawrence studied me intently. "You're saying you cooperated with the NHI? Communicated somehow?" "Not with words," I admitted. "But yes, we understood each other. They're not what you think they are, Lawrence. They're not just subjects for your research, anomalous entities to be cataloged and contained. They're guardians of something ancient, something they've protected for thousands of years." "Guardians," he repeated, testing the word. "That would explain much of their territorial behavior, their aversion to human encroachment." Captain interrupted all business despite the extraordinary events we'd witnessed. The perimeter team reports all NHI signatures retreating. Whatever was happening appears to be over. We should evacuate while we have the opportunity. Lawrence nodded, his scientific curiosity momentarily overridden by practical concerns. Agreed. Pack only essential equipment. We'll return for the rest once we've analyzed the data. As the team prepared for departure, I stood at the water's edge, gazing out at the now peaceful lake. The mist had dissipated, revealing a sky brilliant with stars. Lake Wanana had reclaimed its secrets, at least for now. But I knew they would return. The creatures, the researchers, perhaps even the entity from beyond the threshold. This ancient place would continue to draw those who sought answers to mysteries beyond human understanding. And as our boats sliced through the dark waters toward the cabin, I realized my path had been irrevocably altered. I could never return to my former life, to routine ranger duties and mundane wilderness management. I had glimpsed something profound at the boundary between worlds, formed a connection with an intelligence not of human origin. Whether I wanted it or not, I had become part of the Shadow Water's endless story, a new guardian at the threshold between worlds. The lake kept its secrets close, revealed them only to those who listened with more than their ears, watched with more than their eyes. I would listen. I would watch. And when the time came again, I would stand ready at the threshold of Wanana, for the shadows always return with the setting sun, and what sleeps beneath the waters will eventually awaken once more. The morning mist clung to the surface of Lake Wanasabi like a shroud, obscuring the dark waters that stretched nearly 3 miles across the valley floor. From my cabin's porch, I could just make out the hulking silhouettes of ancient pines that ringed the opposite shore. My 4th season as a ranger at Wanasabi Wilderness Area was just beginning, and already I felt the familiar mix of reverence and isolation that came with this posting. "Ranger Matthews, come in." The radio on my hip crackled to life, startling a nearby crow that had been eyeing my breakfast. "Matthews here," I responded, setting down my coffee mug on the weathered railing. "Got a situation. Hikers reported strange sounds near Obsidian Ridge last night. One camper hasn't returned to their group. Possible lost hiker. Can you check it out?" "Copy that. Heading there now." I gathered my gear methodically: first aid kit, topographic maps, GPS unit, extra water, emergency rations, flares, and my sidearm. Standard procedure for search operations, though firearm use was exceedingly rare. Mostly for aggressive wildlife, black bears or mountain lions that occasionally threatened visitors. Or so I had always believed. The drive to Obsidian Ridge trailhead took nearly an hour on unpaved Forest Service roads. The Wanasabi Wilderness stretched across 500,000 acres of the most remote forest land in the Pacific Northwest. Some areas hadn't seen human footprints in decades. Native legends claimed the forest harbored ancient spirits, guardians who protected the land from intrusion. The local tribes had named it Wanasabi, Place of Shadows. At the trailhead, I met the hiking group. 3 college students, wide-eyed and jittery. Their friend, a guy named Alex, had wandered off during the night to take pictures of the stars and never returned. "We heard noises," one of them said, a tall, thin guy who couldn't stop fidgeting with his backpack straps. "Not an animal, at least not like any animal I've ever heard." "What did it sound like?" I asked, pulling out my notebook. The young woman in the group hugged herself against the morning chill. "Like wood breaking, but rhythmic. And then this low sound, almost like moaning, but deeper, much deeper than a human voice could go." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "How long has Alex been missing?" "About 6 hours now," the third hiker replied. "We tried calling for him, but—" He trailed off, glancing nervously at the dense forest. "You did the right thing by reporting it," I assured them. "I'll find your friend. Wait at the ranger station down the road. Someone will drive you back to the visitor center." After they left, I studied the topographic map. Obsidian Ridge was steep terrain with numerous ravines where someone could fall and become injured. Simple explanation. But something about their description of the sounds nagged at me. The trail soon narrowed, climbing steadily through old-growth forest. Massive trees blocked most of the morning sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight beneath the canopy. I called out periodically, my voice swallowed by the dense vegetation. "Alex, Ranger Service, can you hear me?" 3 hours into the search, I found the first sign of disturbance, a clearing where the undergrowth had been flattened in a circular pattern about 15 feet in diameter. In the center lay a backpack, its contents scattered. A camera with a cracked lens, energy bar wrappers, a water bottle. I photographed everything before examining the ground more closely. The soil was soft from recent rain, and the impressions were unmistakable. Footprints, but not from hiking boots. These were enormous, easily 16 inches long, with 5 distinct toe impressions. They were deep, suggesting tremendous weight. My pulse quickened as I followed the prints to the edge of the clearing, where they disappeared into thicker forest. That's when I noticed the smell, a powerful, musky odor unlike anything I'd encountered before. Not bear, not elk, something else entirely. I radioed back to headquarters. Matthews reporting. Found missing hikers' belongings at coordinates 45.28, -121.79. Proceeding to search immediate vicinity, requesting backup. Static answered me. I tried again, adjusting the frequency. Nothing. The dense terrain often created dead zones for radio communication, but I'd never had problems in this area before. The light was already beginning to fade when I found the tree. An enormous pine, at least 6 feet in diameter, snapped clean through about 10 feet from the ground. Not cut, broken, with jagged splinters protruding from both sections. The top portion lay across the trail, needles still green. This was recent. No storm could have done this. No natural force short of a tornado could snap a healthy tree of this size. As I stood examining the destruction, the forest fell completely silent. No birds, no insects, nothing but the sound of my own breathing. Then I heard it. The wood-breaking sound the hikers had described. Crack, pause, crack, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from somewhere ahead of me on the trail. I switched off my flashlight instinctively, crouching beside the fallen tree. Crack, closer now. Something large was moving through the forest, breaking branches as it came. My hand moved to my sidearm, though I knew it would be woefully inadequate against anything powerful enough to snap trees. A low rumble vibrated through the ground, not quite a growl, deeper than any bear could produce. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, resonating in my chest cavity. I'd spent my entire adult life in wilderness areas, encountered everything from grizzlies to wolf packs, but nothing had ever filled me with such primal dread. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I made a decision that went against all my training. I retreated, moving as quietly as possible back down the trail. Whatever was out there, I wasn't equipped to handle it alone in the dark. Alex would have to survive the night. I hoped he'd found shelter. The hike back to my vehicle seemed interminable, each shadow between the trees taking on menacing proportions. Several times I paused, certain I heard heavy footsteps paralleling my course through the woods. But I saw nothing, even when sweeping my flashlight across the undergrowth. Back at my cabin, I radioed in my findings, careful to stick to the facts without interpretation. Missing hiker, signs of struggle, unusual damage to vegetation. I didn't mention the footprints, didn't mention the smell, some things you have to see to believe, and I wasn't ready to be the ranger who cried Bigfoot. As I prepared for bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My cabin sat on a small clearing overlooking the lake, windows facing the water and the forest beyond. I double-checked the locks, something I rarely bothered with in this remote location. Just as I was about to turn off the light, something caught my eye through the window. A shadow, darker than the night, moving at the forest edge. Too large to be human, too upright to be a bear. For just a moment it seemed to turn toward the cabin, and I glimpsed what might have been eyes reflecting the distant moonlight. Then it was gone, melting into the darkness between the ancient trees of Wanasabi. Sleep did not come easily that night. Dawn broke with a heavy mist hanging over Lake Wanasabi, obscuring the far shore entirely. I'd spent a restless night reviewing what I'd seen, trying to rationalize my experience into something that fit my understanding of the world. Perhaps Alex had encountered a bear, explaining the destruction and his disappearance. Perhaps the footprints were actually overlapping tracks from multiple animals. Perhaps the stress of the search had affected my perception. But deep down, I knew better. I was brewing coffee when my radio crackled to life. "Matthews, do you copy? Search team is assembled at headquarters, ETA to your location 30 minutes. "Copy that," I responded, relieved that reinforcements were coming. "I'll meet you at the Obsidian Ridge trailhead." The drive back to the ridge felt different in daylight, though no less ominous. I parked at the trailhead and waited, scanning the forest edge. In the light of day, I questioned my decision to leave the search area the previous evening. It went against every protocol, but some primal instinct had overridden my training. The search team arrived, 2 other rangers and a local search and rescue volunteer with a tracking dog, a German shepherd named Rex. I briefed them on what I'd found, still omitting my more unusual observations. "Let's split into 2 teams," suggested Ranger Rivera, the most experienced among us. "Matthews and I will return to the last known location with Rex. Roberts and Johnson take the eastern ravine in case he fell." We hiked back to the clearing where I'd found the backpack. Rex became agitated almost immediately, whining and circling rather than tracking a scent trail. "What's wrong with him?" I asked the handler. "Never seen him act like this," the man responded, frowning. "It's like there's too many conflicting scents, or something's masking the trail." Rivera knelt to examine the ground, then looked up at me sharply. "What are these tracks, Matthews? You didn't mention footprints this size in your report?" I hesitated. I wasn't sure what to make of them. She traced the outline of one print with her finger. "These are unusual. They continue into the forest," I said, pointing, "toward where I found the broken tree." Rivera stood, her expression unreadable. "Show me." We proceeded deeper into the forest, Rex still behaving erratically, until we reached the snapped pine. In daylight, the damage was even more impressive and concerning. The break wasn't weather-smooth but jagged, as if the massive trunk had been twisted until it gave way. "What could do this?" Rivera whispered, running her hand over the splintered wood. Before I could answer, our radios crackled with Robert's voice. "We found something. Eastern ravine about half a mile from the ridge. You'd better come see this." We found Roberts and Johnson standing beside a small stream looking grim. On the muddy bank lay a single hiking boot, Alex's presumably, and scattered pieces of torn clothing. Blood darkened the rocks nearby. "No sign of him?" Rivera asked. Roberts shook his head. "Just this. But look at the trees." He pointed across the stream. 3 pines, each at least 100 years old, had been snapped at various heights. Beyond them, a path of destruction led deeper into the forest. Broken undergrowth, uprooted saplings, disturbed earth. "It's like something dragged him through here," Johnson said quietly. "Something big." Rivera turned to me. "Those tracks you found, did they lead in this direction?" I nodded slowly. The implications hung in the air, unspoken but understood by all of us. Whatever had taken Alex wasn't a conventional predator. "We need more people," Rivera decided, "and better equipment." "Should we follow the trail?" Roberts asked, clearly reluctant. Rivera hesitated, then shook her head. "Not without backup. This is beyond our usual search parameters." As we debated our next move, Rex suddenly growled, a deep, threatening sound I'd never heard from a search dog. His hackles rose as he stared into the forest beyond the stream. "What is it, boy?" the handler murmured, tightening his grip on the leash. A branch snapped in the distance, then another closer. The rhythmic cracking I'd heard the night before returned, moving parallel to our position. "Everyone back to the trail," Rivera ordered quietly. "Now." We retreated, moving as quickly as we could while maintaining silence. Rex continued to growl softly, his eyes fixed on the forest to our right where something large seemed to be keeping pace with us, just out of sight. The 5-minute walk back to the main trail felt like hours. Once there, Rivera made a call on her satellite phone, requesting immediate assistance from state authorities. Her voice remained professional, but I could hear the underlying tension as she described finding evidence of predator activity and unusual environmental damage. Back at headquarters, we gathered around a topographic map, marking the areas we'd searched and the location of our findings. The other teams had returned empty-handed. "Whatever we're dealing with," Rivera said after the briefing, "it's not in our standard playbook." That evening, state wildlife officials arrived, along with 2 men in unmarked SUVs who identified themselves only as specialists from a federal resource management agency. They interviewed each of us separately, paying particular attention to my account since I'd been first on scene. One of the specialists, a gray-haired man with weathered features, showed unusual interest in my description of the footprints and the strange sounds. "You've worked wilderness areas for how long?" he asked. 7 years, I replied. 4 here at Wanasabi. Ever seen anything like this before? I shook my head. But you've heard the stories, I assume, about what supposedly lives in these forests. I met his gaze evenly. Every wilderness area has its legends. I deal in facts. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer. "We'll take over the search from here. Your team has been reassigned to visitor management. Keep people out of the northern quadrant until further notice." "What about Alex?" I pressed. "His friends deserve answers." "We'll handle it," he said firmly. "Official statement is that it was a bear attack. Tragic, but not uncommon." "That wasn't a bear," I said before I could stop myself. The specialist leaned forward. "No," he agreed quietly. "It wasn't. But bear attack is what goes in the report. Understood?" I understood then that I'd stumbled into something larger than a missing hiker case, something the authorities preferred to keep classified. The realization sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the evening air. That night, I returned to my cabin, now accompanied by an uneasy awareness that Wanasabi held secrets I was only beginning to glimpse. As darkness fell, I stood on my porch, listening to the forest sounds with new attentiveness. From across the lake came a long, mournful howl. Not a wolf, not a coyote, but something that raised goosebumps on my arms. It echoed across the water, seeming to penetrate the walls of my cabin and vibrate in my chest. I knew then that I couldn't simply walk away from this mystery, regardless of official directives. Alex was still out there, or what remained of him, and whatever had taken him was still hunting in my forest. The specialists might have their agenda, but I had responsibilities of my own. As I prepared for bed, I began making mental notes of the equipment I would need for my own investigation. Tomorrow, I decided, I would return to Obsidian Ridge alone, this time prepared for whatever awaited me in the ancient shadows of Wanasabi. Morning brought a heavy downpour that drummed against the cabin roof, matching my somber mood. The rain would wash away tracks, scents, and any remaining evidence, convenient for those who wanted this incident buried, inconvenient for my unsanctioned investigation. I called headquarters to report that I was taking a personal day, claiming a migraine. Rivera didn't sound convinced, but didn't press the issue. The specialists had established a command post at the visitor center, effectively taking over operations. Most of the regular staff had been reassigned to the southern sections of the park. Once the call ended, I gathered my gear with careful deliberation. This wasn't a standard search and rescue mission anymore. This was something else entirely. I packed heavier provisions, emergency shelter, a more robust first aid kit, and my personal hunting knife. I hesitated before adding my off-duty sidearm, a .44 Magnum revolver with stopping power that far exceeded my service weapon. Against my better judgment, I included a small digital recorder. If I was going to violate protocols, I might as well document my findings. The drive to Obsidian Ridge was treacherous in the downpour, mud sliding beneath my tires as I navigated the service road. I parked half a mile from the official trailhead, concealing my vehicle behind a stand of young hemlocks. The last thing I needed was for the specialists to discover my presence. The rain had reduced visibility to about 50 yards, transforming the forest into a gray labyrinth of dripping vegetation. I orientated myself using my GPS unit and set off toward the ravine where we'd found Alex's boot. The going was slow and miserable. Waterlogged ground turned the trail into a muddy creek, and twice I nearly lost my footing on slick rocks. But the weather provided one advantage. The drumming rain masked any sounds I might make, potentially allowing me to move undetected. By midday, I reached the stream where we'd made our grim discovery. The area had been altered, Someone had removed the boot and clothing fragments, and I noticed small flags marking various points of interest. The specialists had been thorough. I followed the path of destruction we'd observed the previous day, moving cautiously through the damaged undergrowth. The trail led northward, deeper into the wilderness area, away from established hiking routes. After about a mile, I noticed the forest beginning to change. The trees here were older, massive trunks stretching toward a canopy that blocked much of the rain. Moss hung in thick curtains, and the undergrowth thinned, suggesting fewer disturbances over time. The trail of broken vegetation ended abruptly at the base of a sheer cliff face that rose nearly 100 feet. Water cascaded down its surface in dozens of small waterfalls created by the rain. I consulted my map, confirming what I already suspected. I had reached the edge of what rangers informally called the Quiet Zone, a section of the wilderness that remained largely unexplored due to its rugged terrain and lack of established trails. I scanned the cliff base, looking for any sign of where the trail might continue. About 50 yards to my right, a dark opening appeared in the rock face, the entrance to what appeared to be a cave. Approaching cautiously, I detected that same musky odor I'd noticed earlier, now stronger despite the rain. The cave mouth was roughly circular, about 8 feet in diameter, with worn, smooth edges suggesting long use. Fresh scratches marked the stone around the entrance. I switched on my flashlight and stepped just inside the opening, allowing my eyes to adjust to the darkness. The cave extended back into the cliff, widening as it went. The floor was surprisingly level and clear of debris, as if it had been deliberately maintained. Something crunched under my boot. I directed my light downward and immediately stepped back. Bones, dozens of them, lay scattered near the walls of the cave. Most appeared to be from deer or elk, but some were unmistakably human. A skull, partially crushed, rested against the cave wall, empty eye sockets staring accusingly at the intruder who had disturbed its rest. My hand moved to my sidearm instinctively. I should leave, report this location to the authorities, regardless of their agenda. But something compelled me forward, a need to understand what was happening in my forest. The cave extended about 30 feet before opening into a larger chamber, and there, illuminated by a shaft of gray daylight from some opening in the ceiling, lay a scene that defied rational explanation. A crude structure occupied the center of the chamber, a shelter built from woven branches and what appeared to be animal hides. Surrounding it were artifacts that spoke of primitive intelligence, tools fashioned from bone and stone, containers made from hollowed wood, and most disturbingly, items of obvious human origin. A wristwatch, a boot that matched the one we'd found. Tattered clothing arranged in what almost appeared to be a deliberate display. I activated my recorder, whispering descriptions of what I was seeing, knowing how incredible it would sound. This wasn't the random collection of a scavenging animal. This was a dwelling. As I documented the scene, I became aware of a rhythmic sound echoing through the cave. Not the cracking of wood this time, but a slow dripping from the ceiling. The chamber had fallen unnaturally silent otherwise, the usual subterranean sounds of water and shifting stone absent. Then I realized the dripping had pattern. It was too regular, too measured. I turned slowly, directing my light toward the sound. In the darkest corner of the chamber, partially concealed by a natural column of stone, something moved, something massive, something watching. I caught only glimpses as it shifted position. Matted hair covering enormous limbs, a sloped shoulder that brushed the ceiling nearly 9 feet above the floor, eyes that reflected my light with an amber glow that spoke of intelligence and primal anger. My light beam caught a flash of pale color clutched in what might have been a hand, a scrap of fabric that I recognized with horrified certainty as the shirt Alex had been wearing in the photos his friends had shown me. For a moment that stretched into eternity, we regarded each other across the cave. Ranger and legend, human and something that defied classification. I felt a pressure building in my skull, a sensation that transcended ordinary fear and approached some deeper genetic memory of being prey. Then it moved. What followed exists in my memory as fragmented impressions rather than a coherent sequence. The creature, for I have no better word, lunged not toward me but deeper into the cave system, moving with shocking speed for its size. I caught impressions of massive limbs, a head that seemed to sit directly on sloped shoulders, and that overwhelming musky scent. I retreated, nearly falling in my haste to reach the cave entrance. Outside, the rain had intensified, reducing visibility to mere yards. I ran blindly, abandoning the careful tracking that had brought me here, focused only on putting distance between myself and the cave. How long I ran, I cannot say. Eventually, physical exhaustion forced me to stop, collapsing against the trunk of an enormous cedar. My lungs burned and my legs trembled with fatigue and residual terror. I had dropped my pack somewhere in the flight, retaining only my sidearm and the recorder clutched in a white-knuckled grip. As my breathing slowed, I became aware of my surroundings once more. The forest had changed again. The trees here were arranged in an almost circular pattern around a small clearing. At the center stood a weathered stone structure, roughly 4 feet high, carved with symbols I didn't recognize. An altar of some kind, perhaps, or a boundary marker from some forgotten era. I approached it cautiously, running my fingers over the worn carvings. Among them, one stood out with disturbing clarity, a crude but recognizable depiction of a figure, massive and hunched, with long arms and a suggestion of thick hair covering its body. The stone felt warm beneath my touch despite the cool rain, as if it retained some inner heat. And as I examined the carvings more closely, I realized some of them weren't ancient at all. Fresh marks had been added recently, the exposed stone lighter than the weathered surface around it. Someone, or something, was maintaining this marker, communicating through it perhaps in a language I couldn't begin to comprehend. The realization that I was standing in what might be a ritual site used by the creature from the cave spurred me back into motion. I needed to return to civilization, to process what I had seen, and decide what to do with the knowledge. The rain finally ceased as evening approached, and I managed to orient myself using landmarks and my compass. I had lost my GPS unit along with my pack, but years of wilderness experience guided me back toward the ranger station. Night was falling as I emerged from the forest near the service road, about 2 miles from where I had parked. As I trudged along the muddy track, headlights appeared around a bend, an unmarked SUV identical to those the specialists had arrived in. I stepped off the road, concealing myself behind a fallen log. The vehicle slowed as it approached, spotlights mounted on its roof, sweeping the forest edge. They were searching for something, or someone. The SUV passed without stopping, but its presence confirmed my suspicions. The authorities knew more than they were admitting about what lived in Wanasabi. This wasn't a new discovery, but an ongoing situation they were monitoring and concealing from the public. I waited until the vehicle disappeared around the next bend before continuing, now moving through the forest, parallel to the road rather than on it. By the time I reached my hidden vehicle, full darkness had fallen, and a new sound echoed through the forest, the distinctive whump-whump of helicopter rotors somewhere to the north. Whatever I had stirred up with my intrusion had prompted a significant response. As I drove carefully back toward my cabin, I replayed the recorder, half expecting to find it empty, some cruel trick of an overwrought imagination. But there it was, my breathless narration of the cave's contents, followed by a sound that made me nearly drive off the road, a deep, rumbling vocalization that had not registered in my conscious memory during the encounter. A language, perhaps, or a warning. Evidence, at minimum, that what I had seen was real. Back at my cabin, I secured the doors and windows, though I harbored no illusions that such measures would stop the creature if it decided to come for me. I transferred the recording to my laptop and wrote detailed notes of everything I had observed, from the cave dwelling to the stone marker in the forest. As I worked, a new conviction formed in my mind. The specialists weren't just covering up the existence of an unclassified species, they were protecting it. The question was, why and what connection it might have to the ancient tribes who had named this wilderness the Place of Shadows. Tomorrow, I decided, I would seek answers from the only source likely to speak truthfully, the tribal elders whose ancestors had lived alongside whatever stalked the forests of Wanasabi, long before rangers and specialists arrived to manage the wilderness. The Tribal Cultural Center sat at the edge of the reservation, about 40 miles from Wanasabi's main entrance. I arrived shortly after it opened, having called in sick for the second consecutive day. My phone had been buzzing with messages from Rivera and, more concerning, from the specialists, but I had ignored them all. The center was quiet, just a few visitors examining displays of traditional crafts and historical photographs. I approached an elderly woman arranging pamphlets at the information desk, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, turquoise jewelry adorning her wrists and neck. "I need to speak with someone about Wanasabi," I said quietly, showing my ranger badge. "About its history and legends." She studied me for a long moment, her dark eyes revealing nothing. "Why does a park ranger need to know old stories?" she asked finally. "I've seen something," I admitted, "something I can't explain." She nodded slowly, as if my words confirmed a suspicion. "Wait here." She disappeared through a door marked "Staff Only," returning minutes later. "Come," she said simply, holding the door open. She led me to a small conference room where an elderly man sat at a table, his weathered hands resting on a carved wooden cane. He nodded at the chair across from him. "This is Bernard Whitefeather," the woman said, "tribal historian. If anyone can answer your questions, it's him." She left, closing the door behind her. "You've seen the Guardian," Whitefeather said without preamble, his voice surprisingly strong despite his apparent age. I hesitated, then nodded. "In a cave near the northern cliff face. It had collected things, human things. And now the government men are scrambling," he said with a hint of satisfaction. "They think they can control everything with their protocols and classifications." "What is it?" I asked. "Some undiscovered species?" Whitefeather tapped his cane against the floor. "Not undiscovered. Known to my people since before Europeans came to these lands. We called them Saquon, the Elder Brothers. They were here first, and they will remain when humans have gone." "It killed a hiker," I said. "Took him to its cave." "Perhaps," Whitefeather conceded. "Or perhaps the hiker violated boundaries he should not have crossed. The Saquon are territorial, and they understand more than you might think. They watch, they learn, they remember." "The specialists know about them," I said. "They're covering it up." "Of course. They've known since the 1970s when they first established a research station within the wilderness area. They study the Saquon from a distance, document their movements, occasionally retrieve their dead when one dies. All very scientific." He spoke the last word with undisguised contempt. Why keep it secret? This would be the zoological discovery of the century. Whitefeather laughed, a dry sound like autumn leaves rustling. "Can you imagine what would happen if the world learned that creatures from mankind's darkest folklore actually exist? That something stronger, older, and possibly smarter than humans has been living alongside us, watching us? The specialists understand what my people have always known. Some truths are better left in shadow." "How many are there?" I asked, trying to process his words. "No one knows exactly. They migrate through vast territories, following ancient paths. But Wanasabi has always been special to them, sacred, you might say. The stone markers you saw in the forest, they were placed there centuries ago, a boundary agreement between my ancestors and the Saquon." I stared at him. "How did you know about the stone markers?" He smiled slightly. "Because I was taken to see them as a child, just as my grandfather was, and his grandfather before him. Some of us are chosen to remember to maintain the old ways, to respect the boundaries. The authorities don't respect those boundaries," I pointed out. "They've built roads, visitor centers, hiking trails. And notice how many accidents occur each year in certain areas. Notice which sections of the wilderness remain closed due to unstable terrain or sensitive habitat. The specialists may use different words, but the result is the same, keeping humans away from Saquon territory." I thought about the northern quadrant, perpetually restricted for various bureaucratic reasons that changed each season. It made a disturbing kind of sense. "What should I do with what I know?" I asked finally. Whitefeather studied me. "You have seen what few outsiders ever see and live to speak of it. The Saquon could have taken you in that cave, but it did not. That suggests you might have a role to play." "What role?" My people have always had those who walked between worlds, human and spirit, civilization and wilderness. Perhaps you are such a bridge." Before I could press him further, the door opened. The woman from the information desk entered, her expression grave. "There are men looking for him," she said to Whitefeather, nodding toward me. "Government types, 2 vehicles in the parking lot." I stood quickly. "Is there another way out?" Whitefeather pointed his cane toward a side door. "Through the cultural archives, then the loading dock. My granddaughter will show you." As I moved to follow her, he caught my arm. "The Saquon respect courage and honesty. If you return to the forest, go openly. Take no weapons. Bring an offering, food, left at the stone marker. Speak aloud your intentions. Will it understand?" "Better than you might think," he replied. "They've been watching us for thousands of years. Some say they can even take things from our minds without words." The woman, Whitefeather's granddaughter apparently, led me through a room filled with artifacts in glass cases, then down a hallway to a metal door that opened onto a small loading area behind the building. "My car's out front," I said, realizing I was effectively trapped. "Take mine," she offered, handing me a set of keys. "The blue truck in the corner. I'll retrieve yours later." As I took the keys, she added, "My grandfather doesn't suggest offerings lightly. If you go back, follow his advice exactly. The Saquon don't give second chances." I thanked her and slipped out, making my way to an aged blue pickup. As I pulled away from the cultural center, I glimpsed 2 men in dark suits entering the main entrance. The specialists had tracked me down faster than I'd anticipated. I took back roads toward Wanasabi, my mind racing through everything Whitefeather had told me. If he was right, if the Saquon were an intelligent species that had coexisted with humans for millennia, then the implications were staggering. But one question remained paramount. What had happened to Alex? Was he dead, a victim of territorial aggression? Or was there some other explanation for his disappearance? I needed to return to the forest, to the cave. But this time I would follow Whitefeather's advice and go without weapons, bearing an offering instead of threats. First, though, I needed supplies, and a plan for evading the specialists who were clearly monitoring my movements. I drove to a small town about 30 miles from the wilderness area, where I purchased food items for the offering: fresh fruit, bread, and salted meat that would travel well. I also bought basic camping supplies to replace what I'd lost during my panicked flight from the cave. As evening approached, I drove toward a rarely used fire service road that provided back access to Wanasabi's northern section. The road was gated and locked, but as a ranger, I had keys to all the maintenance entrances. If the specialists were watching the main roads, this might allow me to slip in unobserved. The plan worked better than I'd hoped. I parked the borrowed truck in a maintenance shed about 2 miles from my cabin, then proceeded on foot through the gathering darkness. From a ridge overlooking the ranger station, I could see unusual activity: additional vehicles, portable equipment set up outside, and personnel moving with the disciplined precision of military rather than civilian authorities. Whatever I had stumbled upon had escalated significantly during my absence. I circled wide around the developed area, approaching my cabin from the lakeside rather than the main path. Inside, I moved quickly, gathering essential supplies and checking my computer. As I'd suspected, someone had been there. Subtle signs of a search were evident in slightly misplaced items, and a chair not pushed in completely. I downloaded my notes and the recording to a flash drive, then deleted the originals. As an afterthought, I left a false trail: a hastily written note suggesting I was heading to the nearest city to speak with a journalist friend. Supplies packed and offering secured, I slipped back into the forest. Night had fully fallen, but the nearly full moon provided enough light to navigate by. I would camp in the forest tonight and make my way to the stone marker at dawn. As I hiked, I felt a strange calm descend. Fear remained, certainly, but beneath it lay a growing sense of purpose. Whitefeather's words about being a bridge echoed in my mind. Perhaps there was a reason I had been drawn to this wilderness, to this particular ranger posting years before. I made camp in a small hollow well off any established trail, not bothering with a fire that might attract attention. As I lay in my sleeping bag, staring up at stars visible through gaps in the canopy, I whispered aloud my intentions: to understand, not to harm, to listen, not to judge. If the Saquon truly could take thoughts from human minds, as Whitefeather had suggested, then perhaps it already knew I was coming. Perhaps it was watching even now from the darkness between the trees. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, I found myself oddly comforted by the possibility that I was not truly alone in the vast wilderness. With that unsettling thought, I drifted into an uneasy sleep filled with dreams of stone markers and amber eyes watching from shadows. I awoke before dawn to the sound of helicopter rotors in the distance. The search had intensified. I packed quickly and continued north, staying beneath the thick canopy, where I would be invisible from the air. By mid-morning, I reached the circular clearing with the stone marker. In daylight, the site appeared even more deliberately arranged, the surrounding trees unnaturally uniform in their spacing. I approached the marker slowly, setting my pack aside and removing the offering I had brought. Following instinct as much as Whitefeather's instructions, I placed the food items at the base of the stone, arranging them with care rather than simply dumping them. Then I stood back, hands open at my sides, and spoke aloud to the seemingly empty forest. I am Ranger Matthews of Wanasabi Wilderness. I come seeking understanding, not conflict. I have seen your dwelling. I know you are watchers of this land, as I am in my own way. I ask to speak with you about the human who entered your territory. My words hung in the still air, feeling simultaneously foolish and profound. Nothing moved in the forest around me. No response came. I waited an hour, then two, sitting cross-legged near the marker, but not so close as to appear threatening. The forest continued its normal activities. Birds called, small animals rustled in the undergrowth, insects buzzed in the warming air. Just as I was beginning to think Whitefeather had sent me on a fool's errand, I noticed the change, subtle at first, then unmistakable. The forest was falling silent in a wave that approached from the north, as if something was moving through it, causing every living thing to pause in momentary respect or fear. I rose slowly to my feet, heart pounding but determined not to show fear. From the deepest shadows between ancient trunks, a figure emerged, massive, over 8 feet tall, its body covered in thick reddish-brown hair. It moved with a fluid grace that belied its size, each step deliberate and silent despite its weight. The Saquon had come to hear me, and now I had to find the courage to face it and speak of murder and territory, of boundaries and respect, with a creature straight from mankind's oldest nightmares. The Saquon halted at the edge of the clearing, partially obscured by the shadow of an enormous pine. Even at this distance, its presence was overwhelming, a palpable weight in the air, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. I fought the urge to retreat as it took another step forward, now fully visible in the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy. My first clear look at the creature challenged everything I thought I knew about the natural world. It stood upright, but with a slight forward stoop, massive shoulders hunched beneath a thick coat of auburn hair. Its face combined features that seemed both ape-like and disturbingly human. A prominent brow ridge shadowed deep-set eyes, a wide nose with flaring nostrils, and a mouth that appeared capable of both bestial snarls and deliberate expressions. Those eyes, amber with vertical pupils like a cat's, fixed on me with unmistakable intelligence. Not the simple curiosity of a bear or the predatory assessment of a mountain lion, but something that spoke of thought, of judgment, of memory. It tilted its head slightly, examining me as I examined it. Then it did something I never expected. It raised one massive hand, palm outward, in what could only be interpreted as a greeting, or perhaps a gesture of peace. Finding my voice, I raised my own hand in mirror response. "I come with respect," I said, the words emerging steadier than I felt. "I seek understanding about the human who entered your territory." The Saquon made a low sound, not quite a growl, more like the rumble of distant thunder. It pointed to the stone marker, then to itself, then swept its arm in a wide arc that encompassed the surrounding forest. The meaning seemed clear enough. "This is my territory, marked by the stone." "I understand," I responded. "But the human—" I hesitated, unsure how to communicate the concept of a missing person to a being that might not share human values regarding life. The creature moved closer, now just 20 feet away. I held my ground despite every instinct screaming at me to run. It pointed at me, then made a gesture like something small and quick moving through the forest. Yes, humans come here, I acknowledged. Visitors, but one is missing, taken. I mimed someone being carried away. The Saquon watched my pantomime, then made a sound that startled me. A series of clicks and deep vocalizations that had structure, rhythm, patterns, language. It pointed to the offering I had left, then back toward the direction of its cave, making the carrying motion I had just demonstrated. Understanding dawned. You took him to your cave, I said. But why? Was he threatening you? The creature approached the stone marker, moving with a grace incongruous with its bulk. It knelt before the carved surface, massive fingers tracing one of the symbols, a spiral pattern that I hadn't noticed before. Then it pointed toward the sky, making a circular motion. I struggled to interpret. Time, cycles, seasons. It repeated the gesture more emphatically, adding a new element, pointing to the spiral, then to its chest, then making a rocking motion with its arms. An impossible thought formed in my mind. A child? You have a child? The Saquon repeated the rocking gesture, then pointed again in the direction of its cave. There's a young one in the cave, I said slowly, trying to process the implications. And Alex, the human, did he threaten your child? The creature bared its teeth briefly, not in aggression I sensed, but to communicate strong emotion. It picked up a stick and snapped it sharply, then pointed towards where a helicopter's distant thrumming could be heard. He brought danger, I translated. Attention from the outside. The Saquon nodded, an unmistakably human gesture that sent a shiver through me. It had been watching us, learning our movements, our expressions, for who knew how long. Is he alive? I asked, the question that had haunted me since discovering the cave. The creature made a gesture I couldn't interpret, then pointed toward the north again, beyond the direction of its cave. He's somewhere else? You moved him? Another nod, followed by a series of gestures, pointing to its eyes, then to the forest, then a walking motion with its fingers. You're watching him? Keeping him somewhere? The Saquon made a sound that might have been affirmation, then pointed at me, at itself, and made a motion like two people walking side by side. The meaning hit me with stunning clarity. You want me to go with you? The creature extended its massive hand, palm up, an invitation impossible to misinterpret. Time seemed to freeze as I considered my options. I could refuse, retreat to the ranger station, report everything I had learned to the specialists. They clearly had protocols for these situations, containment procedures, perhaps even communication methods more sophisticated than my crude gestures. But I remembered Whitefeather's words about being a bridge between worlds, about the Saquon choosing who they revealed themselves to, about respect and courage. I'll come with you, I said, stepping forward to accept whatever fate awaited. The creature turned and moved into the forest, glancing back to ensure I followed. Its pace was deliberate, accommodating my slower human movements. We traveled in silence through terrain that grew increasingly rugged and unfamiliar. After about 2 hours, we approached a ridgeline I didn't recognize from any of the park maps. The Saquon led me along its base to a narrow crevice in the rock face, barely visible behind a stand of young trees. It gestured for me to enter first, a test of trust I couldn't refuse at this point. I squeezed through the opening, finding myself in a narrow passage that quickly widened into a small cavern illuminated by patches of sunlight streaming through cracks in the ceiling. And there, sitting on a crude bed of grasses and what appeared to be torn sleeping bag material, was Alex. He looked up as I entered, eyes widening in shock. "Ranger Matthews," he croaked, voice hoarse from disuse or screaming. I couldn't tell which. "Are you real?" "I'm real," I assured him, quickly scanning for injuries. Besides looking malnourished and disheveled, he appeared physically intact. "Are you hurt?" Before he could answer, the Saquon ducked through the entrance, its massive frame nearly filling the small cave. Alex shrank back against the wall, terror plain on his face. "It's okay," I said, though the words sounded absurd even to my own ears. I think I think it's been protecting you. Protecting? Alex laughed, a brittle sound on the edge of hysteria. It dragged me through the forest, kept me prisoner. I thought it was saving me for food. The Saquon made a disgusted sound, startling us both. It moved to a corner of the cave where a collection of objects lay, including Alex's backpack. It rummaged through the pack, pulling out Alex's camera. With surprising delicacy for such massive hands, the creature turned the camera on and navigated to the stored images. It brought the device to me, pointing at the screen. The photo showed a small clearing, different from the one with the stone marker. At its center was what appeared to be a nest made of branches and moss, and within it, a smaller version of the Saquon, a juvenile, unmistakably. I showed the image to Alex. You photographed its child, I said quietly. Probably wandered into a nursery area. I didn't know, he whispered. I was just hiking, taking pictures of interesting things I found. The Saquon made another series of vocalizations, then pointed toward the cave entrance, then to Alex, then made a shooing motion. The meaning was clear enough. It's letting you go, I translated. Now that I'm here to, vouch for you, explain. Why didn't it just let me go before? Alex demanded, still pressed against the wall. I thought about the helicopter sounds we'd heard, the specialists swarming the wilderness area. Because there are people searching who know about these creatures, people who might want to capture them, study them. It was hiding you until it could safely release you. The Saquon nodded again, that disconcertingly human gesture, and pointed at the camera, then made a braking motion with its hands. It wants the photographs destroyed, I said. All evidence? Alex nodded frantically. Fine, whatever it wants. Just let me out of here. The creature stepped back from the entrance, clearing our path. I helped Alex to his feet. He was weak from his ordeal, but able to walk. As we moved toward the exit, the Saquon caught my arm with a gentle but irresistible grip. It looked directly into my eyes, then pointed to the stone marker symbol traced in the dirt of the cave floor, then to itself, then made a gesture encompassing the entire forest. I understand, I said. This is your home, your territory. I'll make sure people respect that. It released me and made one final gesture, pointing to its eyes, then to mine, then making a circular motion that returned to the starting point. Yes, I agreed, understanding its meaning with unexpected clarity. I'll return someday. We left the cave, Alex leaning heavily on my shoulder. The Saquon did not follow, but remained watching from the entrance, a silhouette against the darkness that seemed to embody the wilderness itself, ancient, powerful, and infinitely more complex than humanity had ever imagined. The journey back took nearly 5 hours, with Alex weakening as we progressed. I supported him as best I could, following game trails and landmarks to navigate back toward the ranger station. As we approached the edge of the developed area, I heard shouts and saw flashlight beams sweeping through the trees. The search parties were out in force. We need a story, I told Alex quickly. Something believable. He nodded, understanding immediately. I got lost, fell, hit my head. You found me wandering, confused from a concussion. And the photos? The creature? Delirium, he said firmly. Stress hallucinations, that's what I'll tell them. I squeezed his shoulder in gratitude. Just one thing, I said as the searchlights drew nearer. What did it feed you? In the cave? Alex's expression shifted to something between wonder and confusion. Berries, he said. Fresh water. Once a fish. It watched to see what I would eat, then brought more of the same. Before I could respond, the search team broke through the tree line ahead. Rivera, Roberts, and 2 of the specialists, armed with more than standard ranger equipment. Matthews, thank God, Rivera shouted, rushing forward. And is that, you found him? How? Questions later, I interrupted. He needs medical attention. Exposure, dehydration, possible concussion. The specialists exchanged glances, one of them speaking quietly into a radio. Within minutes, a medical evacuation team arrived, loading Alex onto a stretcher, despite his protests that he could walk. As they carried him toward the waiting vehicle, one of the specialists pulled me aside. This conversation isn't over, Matthews, he said quietly. We'll need a full debriefing. Everything you saw, everything you did. I met his gaze steadily. Of course, but I think you already know what's out there. A flicker of something, recognition, respect, warning, crossed his face. Then you understand the importance of discretion. More than you might think, I replied. Later, after the medical team had taken Alex away and the search parties had dispersed, I stood alone on my cabin porch looking out over the dark surface of Lake Wanasabi. The forest beyond seemed different now. Not just wilderness to be managed, but territory to be respected. A realm where humanity was merely a recent visitor rather than the dominant force. I knew the specialists would return with their questions, their protocols, their containment strategies. I knew Alex would eventually tell his story of getting lost and suffering hallucinations from exposure and fear. I knew life would continue at Wanasabi Wilderness Area, with its carefully marked trails and ranger-guided nature walks. But I also knew that deep in the northern reaches, beyond the stone markers with their ancient carvings, something watched and waited. Something that had been here long before humans claimed the land, something that would remain long after our brief moment in the forest's history had passed. And somehow, for reasons I might never fully understand, it had chosen me to witness its existence, to become a bridge between worlds, to carry the knowledge that we were not alone in the wild places of the earth. As if in response to my thoughts, a call echoed across the lake, that distinctive, otherworldly howl I had heard before, but now recognized not as a threat, but as a declaration. A reminder of boundaries, of respect, of coexistence on nature's terms rather than humanity's. I raised my hand in acknowledgement, certain that somewhere in the darkness, amber eyes were watching. And I knew with absolute certainty that I would return to the stone marker when the time was right, to continue the conversation that had begun between ranger and legend, human and Saquon, in the ancient shadows of Wanasabi. The driving rain hammered the roof of my truck as I navigated the winding forest road toward Manitou Peak Wilderness Area. The wipers fought a losing battle against the downpour, and visibility had dropped to mere feet. My GPS had lost signal 20 minutes ago, leaving me with nothing but a paper map and fading daylight. You wanted isolation, I muttered to myself as lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the dense wall of pines on either side of the narrow road. Well, congratulations, you got it. After 12 years working desk jobs at more tourist-friendly national parks, I'd requested a transfer to somewhere remote. Somewhere I could escape the constant flow of visitors asking the same questions day after day. Somewhere I could reconnect with why I'd become a ranger in the first place. Manitou Peak was that place, a sprawling wilderness area covering over 400,000 acres of virtually untouched forest in the Pacific Northwest. The assignment was straightforward: maintain the lone ranger station, patrol designated areas, and occasionally assist the rare backpacker who ventured this deep into the backcountry. The rain finally began to ease as I rounded a bend and spotted a weathered wooden sign, Manitou Peak Wilderness Area, authorized personnel only. Below it, someone had nailed a crudely painted board with the words, "Turn back," in faded red letters. "Charming welcome," I said, turning onto the gravel access road. The ranger station appeared after another mile, a substantial log cabin perched on a small rise overlooking a placid lake. Despite the dreary weather, it looked picturesque, like something from a postcard. 2-story, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides, a stone chimney, and solar panels on the southern exposure of the roof. I parked and grabbed my duffel from the passenger seat. The previous ranger, a man named Jenkins according to my paperwork, had left 2 weeks ago. The official report stated, family emergency, but the regional supervisor had been evasive when I'd pressed for details during my briefing. Jenkins was affected by his time at Manitou, was all she would say. The isolation gets to some people. The cabin key worked smoothly, and I stepped inside, greeted by the musty smell of a place closed up too long. The interior was surprisingly spacious, a main room with a stone fireplace, small kitchen area, communications equipment on a desk in the corner, and a narrow staircase leading to what I assumed was a bedroom. Practical and functional, with few personal touches, except for the walls. Every available inch of wall space was covered with maps of the wilderness area, marked with red X's, circles, and cryptic notes. Between the maps hung dozens of blurry photographs, all seemingly taken at night or in heavy fog. In many, I could make out what appeared to be a large, dark shape at the edge of the frame. "What the hell, Jenkins?" I whispered, moving closer to examine one particularly disturbing photo. It showed what looked like a massive footprint in mud, easily twice the size of a human foot, with a measuring tape placed alongside for scale. A leather-bound journal sat on the desk beside the radio equipment. I flipped it open to find page after page of increasingly frantic handwriting. Day 47, third sighting. Taller than I thought, not a bear, not a bear. Day 61, found another print, 18 inches. No known animal makes tracks this size. Day 89, it watches the cabin at night. I can feel it out there. The final entry, dated just 2 weeks earlier, contained only 5 words. It knows I'm alone here. A sudden thump against the porch made me jump. I whirled around, heart pounding, only to see a fallen branch sliding down the rain-slick boards outside the window. The radio crackled to life, startling me again. "Manitou Base, this is Regional. Radio check over." A woman's voice, professional, but tinged with something else. Concern? I picked up the handset. "Regional, this is Manitou Base. Reading you 5 by 5, over. Good to hear you made it, Ranger. Weather system's moving in fast. You're looking at 3 days minimum of heavy rain and possible flooding in the lower elevations. Recommend you stay put until it passes." "Understood, Regional. I'll use the time to settle in." A pause, longer than necessary. Then, "Ranger, did Jenkins leave any unusual materials at the station?" I glanced at the wall of maps and photographs. "Define unusual." Another pause. "Disregard. Just stick to the established trails when you start patrols. Some areas around Manitou have dangerous terrain. Sinkholes, rock slides. Jenkins went off trail too often." "Copy that," I replied, increasingly uneasy. "Regional out." The radio went silent, leaving me alone with the sound of rain on the roof and a growing sense that I was missing something important about this assignment. I spent the next hour unpacking and exploring the cabin more thoroughly. The upstairs held a bedroom and small bathroom with a shower that ran on collected rainwater. The maps continued upstairs, along with more photographs, these showing broken trees, twisted as if something massive had pushed through the forest. In the bedroom closet, I found a rifle case containing a high-powered hunting rifle that wasn't standard Ranger issue, along with several boxes of ammunition. Beneath it lay a motion-activated game camera and a stack of memory cards labeled by date. Night fell quickly, the darkness absolute in a way city dwellers never experience. I built a fire in the fireplace and heated a can of soup, trying to ignore the eyes of those blurry photographs watching me from every wall. As I finished eating, a long, low howl drifted across the lake. Not quite wolf, not quite anything I recognized. The sound raised goosebumps along my arms. The cabin's generator hummed steadily, powering the lights and radio equipment, but suddenly cut out with a sputtering cough, plunging the cabin into darkness, save for the flickering firelight. In that moment of startled silence, I heard it, heavy footsteps on the porch, slow and deliberate. The floorboards creaked under significant weight as something moved toward the door. I reached for my flashlight, heart hammering against my ribs. The footsteps stopped directly outside. Then came 3 distinct knocks on the door. I remained frozen, flashlight clutched in white-knuckled hands as the knocking came again. 3 slow, deliberate impacts that seemed to vibrate through the cabin's sturdy frame. My mind raced through possibilities. Bear, moose, lost hiker. None felt right. "Hello?" I called, voice steadier than I expected. "Identify yourself," silence answered. Then the footsteps moved away, heavy and unhurried, circling toward the side of the cabin. A window rattled, as if something had pressed against it. I grabbed the rifle from the case, loaded it with fumbling fingers, and approached the window cautiously. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness outside, illuminating nothing but rain and swaying pine branches. The generator kicked back on suddenly, lights flickering to life. I spent the remainder of that first night alternating between watching the windows and poring over Jenkins' journal, each entry more disturbing than the last. Day 112. Found hiker's backpack torn to shreds 2 miles south of Blackwater Creek. No sign of owner. Day 134. It mimics sounds. Today it was crying like a child. Almost followed it into the thicket before I realized. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Despite regional's warning about the weather, the storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine wilderness washed clean by rain. I stepped onto the porch, coffee in hand, and surveyed my new domain. The lake stretched before me, mirror smooth and reflecting the snow-capped peak of Manitou Mountain. Dense forest surrounded the clearing where the cabin stood, a sea of green punctuated by the occasional splash of yellow, as aspens began their autumn transformation. It was breathtaking and utterly silent. No birdsong, no chittering squirrels, no buzzing insects. The absence of sound was profound and deeply unsettling. I decided to conduct a perimeter check of the immediate area, service weapon holstered at my hip and Jenkins' rifle slung across my back. The ground around the cabin told a story. Multiple sets of the enormous footprints photographed on Jenkins's walls, some fresh enough that water still pooled in their depths. They led into the forest to the north, toward a ridgeline that Jenkins had marked repeatedly on his maps with the notation territory. Following procedure, I radioed regional to report my findings. Manitou base to regional, over. Static then. Go ahead, Manitou. I'm finding some unusual tracks around the station. Large, bipedal, approximately 18 inches in length. Requesting information on any known wildlife fitting that description in the area. A long pause. Manitou, those are likely bear tracks altered by rain or mud conditions. We recommend maintaining standard wildlife precautions and carrying bear spray during patrols. The dismissal was too quick, too practiced. Regional, these aren't bear tracks. They're clearly bipedal with 5 distinct toe impressions. The stride length suggests something very large moving on 2 legs. Manitou, this is Supervisor Blackwell. A new voice, male, authoritative. We've had reports of unusual tracks in that region for decades. Geological conditions create optical illusions in mud and soft ground. Focus on your assigned duties and avoid creating unnecessary concern. Clear? Crystal, sir, I replied, the tension in his voice raising more questions than his explanation answered. Additionally, we're issuing a directive to remove any unauthorized materials from the station walls. Former Ranger Jenkins was conducting unauthorized research. Pack it all for transport back to regional at your next supply drop. Yes, sir. The radio clicked off before I could ask any further questions. I spent the afternoon exploring the immediate surroundings, finding more tracks leading to and from the lake's edge. Near the water, I discovered something that sent a chill through me. A half-eaten deer carcass, not torn apart by scavengers but methodically butchered. The long bones had been cracked open, marrow extracted. Most disturbing were the clear tooth marks on what remained, massive impressions that no known predator in these woods could make. That night, I loaded one of Jenkins's memory cards into my laptop. The footage showed weeks of nothing but wildlife, deer, elk, the occasional black bear, until the final recording. Time-stamped 2:14 a.m., just 3 days before Jenkins' departure. It showed a massive figure moving at the edge of the camera's range. The quality was poor, the lighting worse, but what I could see defied explanation. Bipedal, at least 8 feet tall, with long arms and a sloping forehead. It moved with purpose, stopping to sniff the air before turning directly toward the camera. For a brief moment, its eyes caught the infrared light, reflecting back as 2 glowing orbs in the darkness. Then it charged toward the camera with shocking speed. The footage ended with a violent shake as the camera was apparently knocked from its mounting. Sleep came fitfully that night. I woke repeatedly to sounds outside, branches snapping, heavy movement in the underbrush, and once, what sounded like breathing directly outside my bedroom window. Dawn brought new discoveries. Something had disturbed the equipment shed behind the cabin, bending the metal door like tissue paper. Inside, I found paw prints in the dust. Not the massive footprints from before, but unmistakably canine tracks that seemed odd in a way I couldn't immediately identify. The radio crackled as I was documenting the damage. Manitou Base, this is regional. We have a situation developing in your sector. Hikers reported missing yesterday. Family of 3 last seen entering Blackwater Trail. Their vehicle was found at the trailhead. Search and rescue team is mobilizing, but you're closest. Proceed to these coordinates and begin preliminary search patterns. The coordinates matched an area heavily marked on Jenkins's maps, deep in what he had labeled territory. I gathered emergency supplies, first aid kit, extra ammunition, and the rifle before heading out. The forest seemed to close around me as I moved deeper into the wilderness, following the coordinates on my GPS. The silence persisted. No wildlife, no birds, nothing but the sound of my own breathing and footsteps on the damp earth. 3 hours into my search, I found the first sign of the missing hikers, a child's stuffed animal hanging from a branch, deliberately placed at eye level. Not dropped or lost, but carefully positioned to be seen. "Hello," I called out. "Park ranger. If you can hear me, call out or make a noise." My voice echoed through the trees and faded into silence. Then, faintly, I heard what sounded like a child crying somewhere ahead. I moved quickly toward the sound, pushing through dense underbrush until I reached a small clearing. The crying stopped abruptly. In the center of the clearing stood a crude structure, a teepee of sorts, constructed from broken tree limbs and covered with leaves and bark. Around it, the ground was trampled flat by repeated use. The missing family's belongings were scattered around the site, backpacks torn open, clothing shredded, camping equipment crushed, but no sign of the hikers themselves. As I documented the scene, a powerful stench washed over me, musky, animal, with undertones of decay. The hairs on the back of my neck rose as intuition screamed that I was being watched. Slowly, I turned toward the densest part of the surrounding forest, and there, partially obscured by the shadows between trees, stood a massive figure. It remained motionless, observing me from no more than 50 yards away. I raised my rifle instinctively, but something stopped me from lifting it fully. Some ancient part of my brain recognized a terrible truth. If I fired, if I showed aggression, whatever tenuous boundary existed between us would shatter. We remained locked in mutual observation for what felt like eternity. Finally, it made a sound, not a growl or roar, but something almost like speech, a series of deep, guttural vocalizations that raised the hair on my arms. Then it was gone, melting into the forest with impossible silence for something so large. I keyed my radio with shaking hands. "Regional, this is Manitou Base. I found evidence of the missing hikers at these coordinates, but no sign of survivors. And Regional, I'm not alone out here. Regional, please respond. Over." I repeated into the radio, watching the tree line where the creature had disappeared. Static answered me. Either the dense forest was blocking transmission, or something else was interfering. Night would fall within hours. Standing in the clearing beside the strange structure, surrounded by the destroyed belongings of the missing family, I faced a decision: attempt to continue the search in darkness, or return to the ranger station and resume at first light. The decision was made for me when I heard movement in the underbrush, not the heavy footfalls of the creature I'd seen, but multiple smaller sources, closing in from different directions. I caught glimpses of low, dark shapes moving between trees. The canine tracks from the equipment shed suddenly made sense. The creature wasn't alone, it had companions, pack members. I broke into a run, abandoning stealth for speed, crashing through the forest back toward the direction of the ranger station. Behind me, something gave chase, the sound of multiple pursuers moving swiftly through the underbrush, flanking me, trying to cut off my escape route. A fallen tree provided momentary cover. I dropped behind it, rifle ready, as 3 wolf-like creatures emerged from the forest. But they weren't wolves. Their proportions were wrong, faces too broad, front limbs too long. They moved with a terrible intelligence, spreading out to surround my position. I fired a warning shot into the air. The sound echoed through the forest, and the creatures hesitated, pulling back slightly. Using the moment, I ran again, pushing my body to its limits. The distant roof of the ranger station appeared through the trees as the last light faded from the sky. I stumbled onto the porch and through the door, slamming it behind me and throwing the deadbolt. Seconds later, something heavy collided with the door, once, twice, testing its strength. The radio crackled to life. "Manitou Base, this is Regional. Report your status immediately." I grabbed the handset. Regional, I've returned to the station. The missing hiker's belongings were found torn apart. There's something out here, multiple somethings. Large bipedal creature accompanied by canid pack hunters. They pursued me back to the station. Ranger, listen carefully. Supervisor Blackwell's voice now. Secure all doors and windows. Do not attempt to engage these entities. A security team is being dispatched to your location. ETA 6 hours. Maintain radio contact every 30 minutes. If contact is lost, we'll assume the station is compromised. Sir, what exactly am I dealing with here? I demanded. You knew about this. Jenkins knew. Why wasn't I informed? A long pause. Those entities have been part of Manitou Peak since before recorded history. The indigenous people of the region had a name for the bipedal one. They called it the Lonely One. According to their legends, it was neither man nor animal, but something in between. Territorial, but not necessarily hostile, unless provoked. And the wolf things? Not wolves. Not anymore. The legend says they were once wolves that followed the Lonely One for too long, changed by proximity. Outside, movement on the porch. Not the frantic scratching of the wolf creatures, but the measured tread of something much larger. It's here, I whispered into the radio. Do not engage, Blackwell repeated. The security team. The radio died suddenly, the lights following a second later. This time the generator didn't restart. Complete darkness enveloped the cabin, broken only by moonlight filtering through windows. 3 distinct knocks rattled the front door. I moved to the window, peering carefully around the edge of the curtain. It stood on the porch, taller than I'd estimated, at least 9 feet of matted fur and muscle. Not a costume, not a bear on hind legs, but something primordial and intelligent. Its breath fogged in the cold night air as it waited. It knocked again, the gesture unmistakably deliberate, almost civil. A memory surfaced, something from Jenkins' journal. It understands boundaries. Territory. Respect these, and it sometimes respects yours. Understanding crystallized. The hikers had violated some boundary, entered its territory without showing proper respect. Jenkins had documented the boundaries, tried to understand the rules. And I had been sent in blind. With trembling hands, I unbolted the door and opened it just enough to see the creature clearly. Up close, its features became more distinct. A face somewhere between ape and human. Deep-set eyes reflecting intelligence and something like curiosity. It made no move to attack. Instead, it slowly extended one massive hand, palm up, a gesture unmistakable across species boundaries. In its palm lay a child's shoe, unmistakably belonging to one of the missing hikers. A message. I have them. Are they alive? I asked, not expecting a response. It made that series of guttural sounds again, not random noises, but patterned, intentional communication. It pointed toward the mountains, then held up 3 fingers before closing its hand into a fist. 3 people, taken. The creature took a step back, watching me expectantly. It wanted something from me, a response, a decision. Understanding dawned. It hadn't come to attack, but to negotiate. Territories had been violated, boundaries crossed. Now it wanted to establish new boundaries, new understanding with the new human in its forest. I stepped fully onto the porch, rifle lowered, and met its gaze directly. Take me to them. The creature studied me for a long moment, then turned and lumbered down the steps, pausing at the edge of the forest to ensure I followed. The security team would arrive in hours, but by then, they would find an empty ranger station. My path led into the darkness, following a legend made flesh, toward whatever truth awaited in the ancient shadows of Manitou Peak. What Jenkins had discovered, what I was now learning, was that the wilderness held more than just trees and animals. It contained old powers, old intelligences that demanded respect rather than fear, boundaries rather than bullets. As I followed the massive figure into the forest, I understood that my real work at Manitou Peak was just beginning. Not as a park ranger, but as something much older. An ambassador to a kingdom not found on any human map, negotiating peace with creatures that had watched our rise from the shadows of history. Behind us, the wolf things followed at a respectful distance, guardians of a forgotten sovereign guiding me deeper into a world where human rules no longer applied. into a story much older and stranger than I had ever imagined. My first day at Manitou Peak had ended. My real education was about to begin,